All right, let's get started on our meeting tonight. We are going to start with roll call. And I am Christine Chu.
Francine Weist.
Carolyn Watson.
Erica Malif.
And Ivan Duran.
And we're missing Seema Serafan tonight. She has some family obligations she's attending to, and we wish her well, and we know that she's connecting where she can and making sure she's looking out for our kids too. All right, so that takes us, I think, to the Pledge of Allegiance. Jen, you want to lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, Jen. All right, so now the approval of the agenda. There were some last-minute changes, and I just want to call them out. We added a board business piece, which will just take a minute or two, and there were a few items added into the space. There is time for the comments and updates if we don't take too much time on everything else. Other than that, I think no major changes. Is that right, Jen?
No major changes.
Great. All right. Any board member want to ask for additional changes or have any requests or questions? All right, then we will proceed as planned. We'll consider the agenda approved. So now we will go to consent agenda. Are there questions or comments about the consent agenda? All right, anyone want to make a motion that we accept the consent agenda?
I move that we accept the consent agenda.
Great. Can I have a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Carolyn. All right, so Erica has motioned, Carolyn has seconded. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of passing the consent agenda, we'll assume that you are in favor of it unless you raise an issue right now. Is there anyone opposed to the passing of the consent agenda? Anyone opposed? Okay, we consider the consent agenda passed. Now we're going to move on to public comments, and I will read our guideline that we will listen to all comments carefully. This is an abbreviated form of our guidelines because we do not have the public speaking for themselves, but we do have them writing their own comments and sending them in, and then Jen is going to be able to read them for us. And she'll follow the same rules that we follow for our general public comment, which is up to 3 minutes per speaker. The board will listen to all comments carefully, but will generally not respond to comments spontaneously or without further deliberation. Complaints about specific personnel will not be heard in open session and will not be part of the record of any public meeting. Harassing or derogatory statements about any persons or groups of persons will not be heard. The board also accepts public comments submitted online and will include such comments as part of the official record for the next regular board meeting following the receipt of the comments. You can also make these comments via the district website with the link here. Jen, would you like to, I think we have 3 of them tonight, is that correct? Or,
we
sorry,
have
4?
4. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, so Jen, could you please read through them for us and help us hear those?
Sure. Mike, do I need to put these up? Okay, you got them. Great, thank you so much. Hello, this is from Sophia Roger. The topic is BSD investments. Hello, board directors. Myself and my peers are interested in learning about how BSD invests, more specifically, how BSD could redirect their investments to be more sustainable. We are looking to encourage the BSD to divest from any ties they may have to the fossil fuel industry. Where can find information regarding BSD's investments and who is in charge of these investment decisions? Thank you for your time, Sophia Roger. The second public comment is from Doherty Family et al. Topic, zero tolerance for hatred speech, racial slurs, racist pictures, etc. Hi, Dr. Duran and Bellevue School Board. Hope you and your families are well. Please create a zero tolerance policy on hate speech, racial slurs, racist pictures, etc. It must be enforced equally against every staff member at BSD 405. Please stop delaying and denying restorative justice to the employees who courageously reported and spoke up about harassment, intimidation, bullying, and criminal retaliation by BSD 405. Many thanks, Doherty family et al. From Christina Chamberlain. Topic, options under consideration for learning next school year. Hello, members of BSD. I am writing to express some concerns I have about the options under consideration for learning next school year. First of all, I want to express my gratitude that there have been so many long hours spent and creative ideas presented trying to solve the issues COVID has presented for our children's education. Thank you. I have 2 children entering 7th and 9th grade next year. My son-to-be 9th grader is self-motivated, very organized, and a straight A student. My soon-to-be, not son-to-be. My soon-to-be 7th grader is mostly self-motivated, makes A, B's consistently, and is working hard to keep up that grade average while learning remotely. I share this to illustrate that my kids are really good at school. My husband and I work full-time and have not had the daytime hours to spend helping with their work. We are lucky that they only need some guidance from us to get things done. However, even my kids are struggling with online learning. Some of it is the lack of social interaction, some of the lack of face-to-face time with their teachers. If they attend big picture and are used to working collaboratively in hands-on group projects, suddenly learning at home mostly alone has been a big adjustment for them. I have heard that one option on the table for next year is to have all high school kids continue a full-time learning so that the high school buildings can be used for the younger grades. I think this is not fair to our high school kids. Yes, they are older and more independent, but that does not mean that being alone during the day every day is a good idea for their social and academic development, nor is it better for their mental and emotional health. From our family's experience these past 9 weeks, I can tell you that my independent, self-motivated kids would not thrive with an exclusive online learning environment just because they are older. They still need personal interaction to learn how to socially navigate their relationships, construct their own viewpoint in a larger context, and access support when they need to quickly progress rather than wait for emails to be answered. I strongly encourage you to remove this option from the list. Instead, I would rather see a solution that works for all ages and grades, one that allows some face-to-face interaction and some online learning. I am concerned about the internship program at Big Picture and how these changes will affect that. We have not heard anything about a new plan if internships are not taking place in businesses. Thank you for your time, Christina Chamberlain. And this last one from Amy Stern. Topic, concerns about the direction that has been decided upon for grading during COVID-19. Dear BSD school board members, first, I want to thank you for taking the time to read this and for the tireless work that you have put in to quickly help guide the district as we moved into remote learning in the time of COVID-19. Despite my gratitude, I am deeply concerned about the direction that has been decided upon for grading during this time, and I ask you to consider its consequences. Albeit likely unintended, grading during this time works to further uphold systemic racism that is already pervasive in our educational system, and to further marginalize a large portion of our students, those we often claim to want to support the most. But if Bellevue could be the district to do what if Bellevue could be the district to do what's right for all students? Please consider these points. Best practices for teaching and learning happen within a classroom with a teacher present to promote immediate feedback to every student. In this time of remote learning and teaching, Teams meetings attempt to replicate this ideal environment, but the limitations are vast. Students are unable to attend live meetings because they are caring for siblings, don't have sufficient Wi-Fi, or aren't in the right headspace because they haven't had breakfast, are the students who miss out most. These students are, by and large, students of color, English language learners, students with IEPs and 504s, and these same students are the students who most need the in-person experience. Asynchronous learning has been a linchpin in my planning as a math and health teacher during this pandemic, allowing students to access learning opportunities at any time of the day. This approach, while most equitable in terms of access, does not afford me to meet with every student and give the immediate feedback that they require and deserve for true effective learning. Given a grade for incomplete or not progressing at the end of a quarter and requiring additional work for students to turn that I or NP into an A is a futile task. Students who are not engaging currently for a myriad of reasons are very unlikely to engage in additional expected work. It will set students into the new school year feeling behind for reasons that are currently very likely out of their control. This will not be a measure supportive of social emotional well-being and could easily drive students that we have worked so hard to engage and help achieve success this far. At the last board meeting, having students prepare for the next year was a topic of discussion. While it is true that we can distill essential learning goals for each course, it is not within the power of the district or teachers to 100% guarantee that all students will access every learning opportunity available to them, particularly when we are not meeting face-to-face. This falls on the families now, and many families simply do not have the capacity to both survive and educate their students. As it stands, the notion of grading at all during this time is wrought with privilege. It grants A's to the haves and incompletes/not progressing to the have-nots. It is our job to meet students where they are at. It is not their job to meet us. This means that next year will require teaching of skills that would not have been taught this year had the pandemic not occurred. This isn't unique to Bellevue. Students, educators, and districts around the world will be grappling with this, making adjustments, shifting learning targets. Not only is this okay, it is necessary and just. Please stop widening the gap with this grading policy. By making decisions based on integrity and compassion, we really can provide courageous support for an equitable and exceptional education for all students. Now is the time that we act as a learning community that values one another's humanity, whether their experiences mirror ours or not. In the spirit of do no harm, I fear that we're going to do the most harm to our most vulnerable students. Please consider removing grading requirements entirely. Sincerely, Amy Stern. And that is the last one.
Thank you, Jen. Terrific. And thank you so much to the four individuals who worked to put those comments together and share them with us. We always appreciate hearing the input and feedback from folks in our district, and it does inform what we do. So thank you. We're going to move now, trying to get the agenda back up here for me. There it is. We're going to move now to the construction change orders, and the first item is a memo on just how we're going to deal with the change orders based on legal guidance and so forth. There are just a couple of changes, and Melissa can maybe comment on when we will see this in the actual procedure. We just want to get it documented, but this is the procedure effectively that we'll be using that is in keeping with the law, but it's a little bit of a change because we won't have called discussions, a few items that we used to bring up, some of the smaller change orders, so that we'll reserve the explicit discussions for the larger change orders. Melissa, do you have any quick comments or insights on that you want to share?
No, I just wanted it to come before the board before I made the change to make sure I answered any of their questions. So we'll make the change in the procedure following this meeting. Perfect.
And board, I think you had this was given to you a couple weeks ago, and at least one person was able to submit some questions. Did anyone else have questions for Melissa or feedback today? This is really just it's a procedural change, so it doesn't require any board formal approval. But if we have questions, we want to just make sure we get them answered.
I just wanted to express that I appreciate this memo because it clarifies things for me. And for many years I was confused. I mean, I was voting on things that I wasn't actually voting on, if that makes any sense. Yes. And so this clarifies it and makes sure that we're voting on things that are over a certain amount and other things are already included.
Are we still going to see the other change orders, just like in the consent agenda or something? Okay. See, Christine.
Most of that's correct, right? I said yes.
Yes. So we'll still let you see copies of that. I mean, we'll still have them come to you, and if you have questions on why or the driver behind it, happy to answer those. But you will not have to vote on them.
Yeah. Right. Well, it's good because I guess. Yeah, I didn't like the idea that I was voting on something that was already done, you know? Mm-hmm. Didn't make sense. So good.
All right, so then we're done with that item. There's no further discussion. And then that takes us to the two items that we are going to call out for this week, one of which might not have been called out had this process been in place. But because it wasn't finalized, we'll just go ahead and leave them both here. So is Jack going to take questions on the Interlake kitchen remodel, or is this Melissa?
I'll take care of that.
All right.
Okay, we're seeking approval for a award of contract for architectural and engineering services in the amount of $671,505 plus an allowance of $30,000 for reimbursable expenses with Sierra Market Architects for architectural and engineering services for the Interlake High School remodel, Phase 1 kitchen and servery. So just real quick background is that back in about 2015, we were Interlake was one of our big lunch partners out there. We do a lot of lunches out there at that school, and some of the area is really tight. And the kitchen was not renovated in the 2003-05 renovation to Interlake. And it is really in need of some additional work. And so we had a feasibility study done back in 2015 by Sierra Martin Architects, and the cost was about $4.5 million. So anyway, we just shelved that and we included it in the recent 2020 bond measure for the project for Interlake High School, which is to add more classrooms and support spaces. But we decided also that since we had this pretty well designed out and working with the nutrition services folks, that we wanted to go ahead and break this into a phase 1 so we could go ahead and get this one going now while we still had time before some of the other projects broke loose. So this is going to get Interlake project started. We still have to do design classrooms, other things out there. So there's still other work to be done, but this would be something that could be done during the next school year and be done away from the kitchen area so it doesn't impact the servery and the service to the students, but then the actual work in the area where the servery takes place and some of that renovation would be done during the summer. So we're seeking approval of the award of this contract.
Okay, are there any, thanks Jack. Are there any questions for Jack? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and propose that we accept the motion as presented. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right, any further discussion? I have one quick question, which is based on the changes afoot and things that we think might come from our experience with COVID and the fact that we don't expect things to ever quite go back to our old normal, are there any changes that need to be made in this remodel plan to accommodate any new standards that we think before we jump in? And would we be able to take a look at that and accommodate that before we spend the dollars and proceed with the construction?
Yeah, that's one of the issues that we're dealing with on all the projects that are currently under design and looking at the current best practices out there. And we know things are going to change. And so certainly flexibility is one of the key elements we're looking at. So yeah, we're taking all things like that into consideration. And you know, we're gonna learn a lot next year when we get started again in terms of, you know, how things are going to function and the rest of it. So we're going to keep all those things in mind.
Would it be possible, Dr. Duran, for any projects that are going through design phase now or that haven't started the next phase of their construction, either started at all or started the next phase of construction, for the board to get informative updates, maybe just in the consent agenda, about any modifications that were made for COVID and confirmation that reviews based on new needs and best practices were done on each project?
Yeah, I think that's something we can ask Jack and facilities team to think about putting together, and we just put it as consent for just like are you asking like just for information?
Yeah, I just want to, like, that way we kind of know that each project that hasn't been started yet we've done due diligence. We know we have a history with this department of really thoughtful design approach, and it would be great to sort of document for us and for the public how we looked at any changes that would come from COVID, and what we've learned from that to minimize disease transfer and so forth, and how we have adopted best practices, and that we are using our public funds wisely and aren't going to have to come back and say, well, we just did this project and now we need to modify it because there was this new thing we should have taken into account.
Yeah, I would just say we're in the process of doing the design work, the front end design work at Newport High School. So we've been doing that online with the design committee at Newport High School. And so going back to the Interlake, one of the things that we know that's coming out of that is we're going to need to make sure we provide plenty of hand washing stations, especially in the cafeteria, public areas, that type of thing. So those are just a couple of things that come to mind. So we'll certainly make sure that you have an update on any of those things that we're incorporating in the new project.
Thank you so much. I think that would not only be helpful for us, but it would be really helpful for the public to see and watch how we've adopted and how we are careful about the funds that they provide us. It's a big deal. And I know the thought gets put in. It's nice for people to see it.
Agreed.
All right. Any board members opposed? We'll do the vote by opposition as usual online here. Any board members opposed to this motion? Any board members opposed to this motion? Okay, barring opposition, this has passed. So now we move to the second one. Jack, are you also going to walk us through that?
Yes, and so this is for Highland, and we actually had this ready to go here previous board meeting because we thought we were going to be under the limit. And so anyway, we put this together. So it's a little bit brief in the information, but basically it's we're just seeking approval of this change order number 1 for Highland Middle School in the additive amount of $84,243. Basically, these things are, again, this is the first change order that we've had for Highland, and we're well within our budget, and so there's no impact to that that's going to create any kind of changes necessary to the budget. And again, some of these are just basic things that we've been required, some additional steel modifications and fireproofing by the city of Bellevue, for an example. And the bigger one is the temporary street lighting that we've put out on Belred Road, just because of the somewhat delay of getting the poles for the new lights here on a timely manner. We wanted to make sure that even though it was a temporary sidewalk out along Belred Road in front of Highland, that we did provide lighting for the pedestrians using that.
Great. All right, thank you. Are there questions for Jack about this? Okay, my question is the same as the previous, just is there any plan for Highland before we open it to do sort of a COVID review and see if we need to do any change orders to address the contingencies that we're going to need to deal with?
Yeah, we're continually taking a look at that. And so, Highland, well, it's, nearing the completion. One of the things that we're learning there is the process we're going through with all of our contractors coming into the site to meet the requirements. And so, again, a lot of hand washing and a lot of opportunities to check in before they get into the building. So there's going to be some things definitely that we can do as far as entering the building, and then also looking at how we can provide some additional hand washing in the main cafeteria area. Now, even though things have been pretty well buttoned up and we're starting to do flooring, we could still have an opportunity that we might be able to go ahead and look at how we can add some additional hand washing stations in that area. And we know that's going to be something that's going to be with us for foreseeable future.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Any other questions? All right.
Well, I just wanted to express that I know there's a lot of parents who were concerned about hand washing stations. So hearing that we're thinking of adding them at both Highland and Interlake is a good step in the right direction.
Excellent.
Yeah, we just we definitely believe that's the way to go. If we can make it as part of the regular, the regular infrastructure of the school, that's the best way to do it. Because right now we're also looking at a lot of different things in preparation for opening school again, and that includes some portable hand washing stations and other things. So
good. Yeah.
those are the kind of things that we're going to be looking at, and then eventually getting to a point where maybe we have to do some renovations on some of the existing schools during the summer to add more permanent hand washing stations, just as one example.
What about like plexiglass dividers? Well, I'm not an expert on this, so I'm sure you've got a list of the kinds of things.
We have done research, and we've been looking on places that have these available, and they are generally they're a portable type thing and able to stand on a desktop or something like that. So we're looking at a number of different options out there. I've got quite a list of things here. Has been shopping online to see what's available and so on. So we're working on that all the time.
Great.
right.
I'll be happy to relay that to some of the parents who've been worried.
Yeah, well, we're looking at any and all options right now, and of course, a lot of it's just going to depend on what kind of directions we get from OSPI and the state. So we're trying to make sure we're trying to cover all of our bases as much as possible.
All right, thank you, Jack. Any other questions on this or comments? Okay, I'm going to motion that we accept the change order as proposed.
I'll second.
Any further questions or discussion? All those opposed, please note so now. Anyone opposed? Okay, barring any opposition, this has passed. And Francine, before we get to the next item, I think you have a comment.
Yes, I had wanted to mention it with the public comment section. So, as individual board members, and then sometimes with the administration, depending on what the nature of the question is, there's a response. And so I know some of those comments had responses already. And for those that we can share among board members, if a particular board member responded, I just wanted to kind of announce it in this open public meeting so that those responses could be shared with everyone if appropriate and necessary. You're muted, Christine.
Thanks. Has to happen, and I'm always the person that makes it happen. So I appreciate you bringing that up. There is one thing that I will note, and I have responded to at least one of the teachers who has raised some concerns about equity grading and incompletes and so forth. And so I asked some questions because I know that the board will be engaging with the rest of the staff in contingency planning next week. So I wanted to make sure that I had a good understanding of that and that the board had more information. So I will be meeting with one of the commenters who came on tonight, Allison Snow, to learn, oh no, sorry, not Allison Snow, misspoke, my bad. Let me just get that comment person. It was, I think, was it Amy Stern was tonight's commenter, is that correct? Yes, yeah. Thanks, Jen. Amy Stern, who wrote in, and I will be meeting with her later in the week to learn more, and I will share whatever I learn with the board at our, in the contingency planning. I do want to note that in the response, I noted that the state gave us some constraints that we had to respect in terms of our grading options, and our district did a very thoughtful job of trying to determine which system we would use that would do no harm. So hold on a second. Is my microphone not working, or is that someone else?
I think that's someone else.
Okay, great. Sorry, I just didn't want. So anyway, I just noted that the district had some constraints, and that within those constraints, it did go out of its way to be as equitable as possible with the systems. And I'd like to learn other suggestions and things they have both about that. But I also asked if they could talk about what it means when our students aren't prepared, how we could prepare them, and what it means. So for those students, regardless of how a grade is assigned or not assigned, we still have the issue of whether or not all students are prepared for the next level of classes, and we want all students to be able to progress at a comparable rate into the next phases. So I just asked to learn more about that. So I will share with the board whatever I learned. Francine, is that the sort of information you wanted to get?
Yes, thank you. So I just really appreciate you taking the time to do that response and then meet. And if I'm potentially available to meet as well. I think it's really important to figure out what are the resources that we need to provide so that all students can succeed and that all students can be prepared. We want to have those expectations that we are able to serve each and every student. And so really understanding where there might continue to be gaps in the resources that are being provided to achieve that goal is really helpful for us as we go forward. So thank you.
Yeah, and just to clarify also, like the way that the district is working on all the contingency planning, we'll get a little bit of an update on that in a minute here. It is with our teachers and all of our educators and all of our and core representatives of our staff throughout the district to make things work. So that voice is also being heard, but I think it's nice when someone reaches out to the board to make sure that the board also takes the time to get some of that understanding and share it. So hence the follow-up meeting. All right, so I think that brings us then to the COVID updates. So the ask here is we have a pretty clear set of goals and things that we're trying to tend to during this period of building closure and learning and nutritional needs and other things. And basically what we're going to get is an update on anything where a goal has made significant progress or a goal has run into a problem of advancing, or there are some questions or points of interest that are worthy of highlighting. Otherwise, if things are just kind of going the course as planned, we probably won't get much of an update. All right, Dr. Duran, do you want to lead us through?
I say, yeah, that's that's accurate in terms of what we're doing. And I think, you know, as we have been, doing our work here, we're really focusing to ensure that we're doing what we said we're going to do over these next 5 weeks of school. And so we've even shifted our stand-up meetings that we have on a once-a-week basis, where we're actually going through the Q4 goals, and everyone's hearing, kind of where we are and, what some of the progress is, if we're hitting some of the roadblocks or if there's any questions. So it's been really a great shift for us to really be thinking about the work that we're trying to accomplish during this time, while we're still thinking about, what the fall is going to look like. And I really appreciate all the work that the staff's been doing and preparing for all this. So it's been really helpful for us to gain the insight and to be committed to what we said we were going to do. So I'm going to hand it over to Eva Collins, who's going to lead us through this section and pull on who she needs to share this part of the report.
So thank you, Dr. Duran. And so if you can go to the next slide, please, Jen. If you recall, we do have some items that we shared with you when you approved our plan for Q4, and there are some things that we'd like to update you on. They might not all be have made big progress or had huge roadblocks, but we thought these are items of interest that we've been progress monitoring, and so we'll quickly go through some of these items, and then you might have questions or comments or things that you would like us to go more deeply into. So the team is ready to share with you tonight some updates about access and attendance, the high school and beyond plan, and what we're doing about that. Because if you recall, in the past, we had some pretty big data points about kids who had not yet completed their high school and beyond plans. The senior events, we know that's of high interest around what are we doing around the senior events and graduation. And we do have some roadblocks that we've been working around. And students that are engaging in teams, as well as the information that was requested from the board about our application and software support for parents. So we have an update for you on that. And then the rapid design process, we're not going to share with you the outcomes from the rapid design, but we want to share with you a little bit about the process as a preview for next week. Okay, so then if you can see in this other bubble in upcoming meetings that we have some other things that we anticipate that we'll have some sharing for you at the May 28th meeting, and then again at the June 2nd board meeting. All right, next slide, please.
All right, my turn. Good evening, board. This table is showing you a comparison between the last time we shared this data with you at the April 20th board meeting and where we're at today. So it's basically the percentage of students accessing either Teams and or email. So There you see the table in front of you. You've got a comparison from the week of April 26th to the week of May the 11th. And one thing I do want to kind of point out is that generally in terms of progress, usage is unchanged. However, I do want to point out, if you look at like 84% of students accessing email as of this week and 93% accessing Teams, it's important to point out that it's not necessarily that 7% or 16% are not accessing email or Teams, because this is all using the district platform. So district email, district Teams, and at the K1-2 level, we have a lot of students who are accessing through their families or their parents, typically, personal email accounts. So just want to point that out. I do want to point out that as well that even though we're generally stable, there was a decrease in our students with receiving free and reduced, who qualify for free and reduced lunch. And I think that really kind of speaks to the disproportionate impact of this crisis on certain families and marginalized folks, and certainly families in poverty, and why we really do need to continue this focus that we've had on providing basic needs to our families. So kind of in terms of like the issues that we're facing, initially it was really getting technology into the homes and into the hands of families and students. And more recently, it's been focusing on engaging students in the learning. And so mitigation, you heard last time, the extraordinary efforts that our tech department, with support from family engagement team, to really make sure that families had access to the technology they needed. And more recently, it's really been schools and school staff going above and beyond in terms of their efforts to connect with kids. Next slide. So you may know, you probably do, that we've been tracking attendance, and attendance is not being tracked in the normal sense for obvious reasons. We're tracking student engagement as opposed to student attendance. And tracking student engagement really is critical in making sure that we are able to support and provide support for students. If we're not able to engage them, we're not able to support them. And so teachers monitor student engagement on a weekly basis, and they enter into Synergy student engagement based on students attending Teams lessons, their email communication, their efforts in OneNote, for example, or completed assignments, are all ways that teachers assess engagement and record it in Synergy. And we ask teachers to record in Synergy as early as possible to make sure that they can support kids who they're not hearing from or are under engaged. So that just shows, you know, the trend lines for each of our 3 levels, including the choice secondary schools. And what you can see there pretty clearly is that our elementary schools and choice secondary schools are attending are engaging at a higher level, although the trajectory is really quite positive. And most recently, it's been improving as we've been taking attendance. Next slide, please. So this one breaks down attendance by week by student group, and it's pretty fascinating. One of the things that's concerning, obviously, the trajectories and the incline is pretty positive for all student groups, but we really see that our McKinney-Vento students are kind of an outlier. The good news, of course, is in this current week, we've seen a definite and pretty significant increase in engagement. But once again, it's to me an indication of this disproportionate impact that this crisis is having on families, and families where economics are a struggle, or families may be out of work. Engaging is obviously a harder thing to accomplish. One of the issues with the way that we're monitoring student attendance or student engagement is there's variance between how teachers define engagement. It's teacher by teacher, so it's challenging to gauge the depth or the level of engagement. But what I think these graphs really do show us, this positive increase over time, is the efforts that schools and school staff have made to engage students in the learning is working out and resulting in increased engagement.
John, since you're addressing clarifying question, I'm just going to ask really quickly, just for clarification. On the previous slide, 2 subgroups notched up quite a bit in engagement this past week, but the overall total stayed about the same. And then
Yes.
when you showed those other slides, I didn't see any groups dropping to account for the fact that a couple groups went up, the rest of the numbers stayed close to the same. So some groups must have dropped. Who were they?
So keep in mind that when students access and or access email and or Teams, the perspective in the last 2 slides is the teacher is making an estimation. They're making a determination of engagement. So it's not exactly the same. You understand that nuance is not exactly the same measure. One is like students and students logging in. One is the teacher determining whether or not the student was engaged and reporting that in Synergy. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I don't think it addresses the question, but that's okay. I don't want to slow us down. I can get an answer offline. It's just a clarifying question for me. So let's keep going.
It's possible I didn't understand your question. Sorry about that if I misunderstood.
No, that's okay. It's great. It's fine. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Jen, next slide. Just wanted to give you an update on the high school and beyond plan. We have a every other week tracking mechanism. We have done 2 letters. One went out to all seniors and in multiple languages and their parents and guardians and caregivers. And that was early on when we were less than 1% of people completing all 4 of the required elements of the high school and beyond plan. And then we did another one the beginning of May, and that went to select seniors that were at different stages of completion. So if you had not yet started, you got one type of letter from the principal. If you had completed at least 2, you got a different letter, and so on. But we're making headway. This is just a very different way of working with the kids, because before we did it in small groups and senior meetings, and we reminded them and senior teachers. And so we're making progress, and we're going to hit this, and we're going to hit it 100%. So we're really excited about it. We've got a plan that our college and career advisors are now reaching out to each and every student that has not started any of the 4 required elements and completed 2 of the 4, because email's not necessarily always the best avenue. So we're doing Teams calls and contacting the folks by text in different ways. Next slide. Thanks, Jen. I just wanted to give you an update on the ceremony senior events. We've had a few adjustments, as I said at the last board meeting, that our students were continuing to meet and making decisions, and you'll see some of those here. Overall, one has now decided to postpone graduation. They want desperately an in-person graduation, and they've decided to wait until December and combine that same weekend with the prom. And that's Interlake. And so you'll see that there. They are doing a senior recognition on 6/16 at 5 p.m., which was the date and time of graduation. And there'll be a lot of events happening with that replicate some of graduation, but they really want to postpone and do their graduation in their own venue in the gym at Interlake. You'll see that prom, many are canceling prom and or trying to postpone. And we have one that's doing virtual, and that's Sammamish on 6/13. You have International that's hoping to do an in-person prom in August, but they recognize that they'd have to be in phase 2. And you have Newport just watching the phases of the governor's rollout, and they would like to do an in-person, but they were thinking of doing it in mini groups of 5 or less and having them come and have an experience in that venue. So lots of changes in that. I think some of our blocks with graduation have been we just received on 5/14 the Department of Health guidance. It came through the state superintendent to our superintendents in the districts, and it had really specific parameters about what's allowed and what's not allowed during the different phases of the governor's plan. And so we're spending time going over that, not just with the high school folks, but with the middle school folks, with the elementary folks, because it pertains to all of us. And to do anything that has any kind of drive-in, drive-through, we'd have to be at least at phase 2 of implementation, which we're currently phase 1 of the governor's plan, reentry plan. And it would have a lot of really strict parameters. So we're working with them on mitigating that and listening to the kids, and we are doing backup plans. We just got our last bid from videographers today, and so we'll be solidifying who that will be tomorrow, and for being able to do the pre-recorded for our families and our students at those graduation pieces. Next slide.
Hi, everyone. It's Sharon Couts. Yes, I just have an update for you about an issue that was brought forward a couple of weeks ago related to not having a place on our district website where parents could go to get information and support with all of our different instructional applications. And so our folks in the technology department have created a document that looks like this. It's much longer than that. It has about 80 different apps in alphabetical order. And you can see on there, it shows a little description of the application, and then there's a link to the different resources and information and support, and then also shows what the target audience would be, the grade level for each of the particular apps. They are putting the finishing touches on this document, and it will be linked and up on the website by the end of this week. Thanks.
All right, next slide, please. Good evening, everybody. The last few slides for our team this evening is to just take a few minutes to give you a brief update in terms of where we are with our COVID contingency planning rapid design groups. As Eva mentioned, these groups, we're still very much in the process of compiling the feedback from the groups, but we did launch each of the 4 rapid design groups last Friday, so on May 15th, there are 4 groups led by each of the school EDs. And so we wanted to take just a couple of minutes to provide you an update with who's on the teams and a little bit about process. And then again, in terms of the content and the feedback, still going through our process of compiling that, putting that together, going through that with Dr. Duran and team more deeply this week. And then next week on May 28th, we have a nice solid chunk of time set aside to go through in more detail the actual feedback from this group. But here's just a brief update of how things have gone so far. Next slide, please. So we have 4 groups running, as I mentioned, and the first one of 4 is physical distancing, and this is in essence thinking about when we do reopen, if we have requirements for physical distancing, how we are going to about effectively implementing those across our K-12 school settings and all that that implies. Next slide, please. And then our second rapid design work team is all focused on remote learning. And so that would be if we were to continue on in a remote learning environment, what might that look like? What have we learned about our remote learning experience up to this point? What's worked well? What are challenges? What are enhancements that we might make? Next slide, please. And then the third group is focusing on the concept of a possible winter resurgence. So if we were to go back and then in November or December, for example, have a second wave of COVID, what are the implications of that? How might we effectively and proactively plan for that? Next slide, please. And then the fourth work group is was focused on re-entry. And so when we go back, should we have a scenario where we might be having a significant number of students who are not planning to return in the way that they were previously attending, how might we effectively plan for that? So that's just an overview of the topics of the 4 different work teams that are running. Next slide, please. So then in terms of process, just a brief word, as I mentioned, each of the teams is led by one of the school EDs. And so you can see on this slide here, each of the teams, who the lead is, and then a little bit about the constituency. We really wanted to make sure for this first rapid design that we had multiple perspectives in terms of brainstorming. So the whole point of this first meeting, which was the bulk of the afternoon last Friday, was to have a manageable group of people together to brainstorm in a creative space what the possibilities might be. And of course, we're continuing to wait for more guidance from OSPI, which we certainly hope will be out possibly by early June, and that will guide all of us across the entire state in our planning efforts. But we're fully aware that it would behoove us to get ahead and begin some brainstorming. So to that end, you'll see that each one of these groups has an elementary administrator on it, a secondary building administrator on it, a central office administrator on it, an elementary BEA rep, a secondary BEA rep, and then we did put a nurse on every team, as well as a note taker to help facilitate. So these groups were essentially brainstorming, thinking about rapid design process and compiling all of the information together, which we're now going through. The idea is that once we have some thoughts compiled, we'll go through them more deeply next week. We will then also be getting some guidance from OSPI, and then we have a list of, as we begin to flesh things out, individuals that we will need to continue to consult with as we expand the planning for what returning may look like in the fall, and all of the considerations that we need to take into account. Next slide, please. And then the last thing that I'll say about it in terms of the process is that we rooted the work of each one of these 4 teams in our equity work, in our North Star of our underlying belief of racial equity in all that we do in our district. And so to that end, we spent some time kind of calibrating with each of our work teams the importance of design work being overlaid with our equity work. You can't effectively have one without the other. And so we spent some time setting the tone in that way. And then the last thing that I would say is overall, just fantastic, really, really dedicated people on these work teams from a wide variety of stakeholder groups that took a nice chunk of time to be in a creative and innovative space. No final decisions, of course, made yet, but a fantastic opportunity to just begin to get people's thinking down. So that's where we are in terms of the process. And then next week, we'll have much more in terms of what we found so far. And that's it for that part.
Thank you. So that does conclude our presentation. If there's anything that you'd like to ask us or any comments or feedback you'd like to give, we'd love to hear that.
Thanks, Eva, and the whole team. Let's go ahead and ask from the board who has questions, but I do want to surface that Carolyn is very excited to have heard some of that last part. Carolyn, do you want to speak your comment yourself?
You mean back on the tech thing?
Yeah, we're gonna
yeah. No, I'm
that.
just amazed that I'm grateful that you took the parent feedback and tried to do a little instructional sheet on 80 apps. I had no idea.
There's an exhaustive list, Carolyn.
Yeah, that ought to cover pretty much everything.
Carolyn, do you have other questions that you want to surface?
Not really, but I appreciate this, the 4 scenarios. I knew there were 4 scenarios, but I was a little fuzzy on what the 4th one was. So I'm glad you're looking at all 4 of those, because I think that covers it. Open with distancing, remote learning, open and close, and going back to sort of normal as best you could.
Yeah. And the first one, physical distancing, is if we're required to maintain physical distancing like we are right now with our childcare, our emergency childcare. Right. So if that's required, you know, what are some things that we might put in place? And we've had practice with that with our emergency childcare. So we would have to, you know, think through that.
I will add, there's some rumors going around in the parent community that I don't know where they came from,
I don't know.
About, you know, how we'll make the high schoolers stay home and things like that. But I don't think that's what you've been talking about.
Eva, can I just make maybe one comment about that? I noticed that there have been a couple of news stories that have circulated. I read one this morning out of Cairo 7 that's got there's a state level task force, Carolyn, that has begun doing some of the brainstorming work. And I just noticed this morning that in one of the Cairo 7 articles, there was mention of that. And so I think it's probably possible that people are seeing what's out there in the news media and beginning to think about things.
Yes, that's right, because they have been following that OSPI workforce, and they're very concerned that there wasn't a Bellevue person on the workforce. But that workforce or work group is huge, and it represents a lot of different stakeholders.
Yeah.
You know what, I'm going to weigh in there, Carolyn. There is actually a Bellevue person on it. One of our very own. Yeah, one of our PTSA advocates from who's one of our biggest special needs advocates, not just in Bellevue, but in the state and really nationally. Sarah Butcher is serving on there. And so I couldn't think of a more,
They were concerned that she wasn't really representing us. I don't know.
Carolyn, I can add, this is Heather, I can add that we do have Sarah serving as consult for us as well. So I actually will be having a conversation with her tomorrow just to go through, because she is serving on the OSPI state level. But in any case, I think that's where people are getting a lot of their information from, and they're reading things in the media and they're seeing what bits and pieces are coming out from OSPI, and they're talking.
Yes, they are. Well, it's good they're engaged. Everybody's engaged. They're watching those documents as they come out from OSPI. Yeah, okay. So if you're working with Sarah, just get her to represent all of us. That'll be great.
All right. We can talk more about that. I included some information about that advocacy, the state work group in my individual update tonight. So let's go ahead and see. Francine, do you have any questions you want to ask from the report?
Yes, so thanks for all of these updates. I had a couple comments on what was presented, and then another question. So since we're talking about scenarios here at the end, I'm glad that we're having our session next week, because I think it's really important for board input, because these things are not just tactical or operational, but it's really strategic in terms of how we approach this opportunity. I think that it's an opportunity to examine learning, examine our district priorities, how we are ensuring that each and every student is succeeding, and how we achieve these under the new constraints. So appreciate having the overview and really look forward to having a discussion next week. So there's that. And then along with that, I thought maybe in this, it was nice to hear about attendance and some engagement, but my question is, how do we know that we're succeeding in what we are in, not just engaging students, but that they're actually prepared with the material? So it's nice to see that there are the clear standards. It seems that there are some weekly check-ins or checkouts that are happening that may be linked to those standards, but it's still not clear what constitutes meeting those standards and how students and families know that they've met those standards. So I was wondering if there could be some comment on that, as well as at this point, are we looking at any differentiation? Because my concern is that there's no differentiation really apparent from what I'm seeing and hearing, which means that rather than it being rooted in equity, it's just left up to student and family resources.
I'm happy to respond a little bit to that from the perspective of high school, Francine. So you're familiar with our senior support plan, and for each one of those students that we are working with, we are identifying what essential standards they need to focus on, what that would look like, and then we outline that really specifically, and then we support them in achieving that. And I'd be happy to provide at the next board meeting a senior support update. It's to the point now where there's so many of the seniors that have been highly successful with that support, which is differentiation. that I can't take them off of our tracking list fast enough. There's just too many. And then they're like, wait, I just want to stay on because this is great. And then I want to let you know that when we started that, which we're in week 7 now, we've seen immense success. We replicated those efforts, and we now have implemented that in grades 9 through 11. And I have over, I want to say 60 classified staff supporting now students in grade 9 through 11. And we are just in week 2 of that for grade 9 to 11. And then in middle school, know that John's working in Algebra 1 with a similar model. So we have done some efforts to differentiate, and we did it based on need. And some of these students have once a week contact with their senior support staff or secondary support staff member, and some are asking, can I meet with you a couple times a week? And we're doing wherever they are. We're meeting them wherever they are, but at minimum once a week.
So
Yeah,
Patty, can I just ask a clarifying question, and then which is how many students is that approximately? So it sounds wonderful, and it sounds like it's really targeted at students maybe in high need, but kind of when we think of, you know, across the board at our, you know, thousands of students at that level, is that trickling down to, you know, all the students who maybe didn't get identified yet for that program?
Sure. So for our senior support staff, that was over 450 kids of seniors. So it was a pretty significant number. And then in our 9th through 11th, it's significantly more than that. And I'll be happy to provide you those numbers by grade level at our next session. Honestly, we have more classified support staff that are like, hey, can I do what they're doing? That sounds like a lot of fun. And we have the need. So I've just been expanding the courses. We now, for seniors, we did math, science, and social studies. For 9 through 11, we added in science because we have enough people that we can provide that service. So our numbers expanded as well because they're in core year-long classes, but I certainly can get the specific numbers to you, but it's a lot of kids.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just add at the middle level, it's not just Algebra 1, it's Algebra 1 and 6th grade math and 6th grade ELA that we're focused doing the intensive support for the kids. And there's about 130 students that we are serving in the same way that Patty described at the high school. I've got about 60 classified and certificated staff serving as case managers, and that intensive support rolled out this week. You know, and your questions are really, it's a good one, and it's a challenging one to answer in this learning from home environment, in that you know, we're not grading as we usually are, so that kind of, you know, individual progress is just a little more challenging to track. So we are really focusing on those students that were assigned either an I in a credit bearing course or an NP in a non-credit bearing course. And as you know, teachers are required to work with families and students in those that receive those designations to develop a plan that school-based teams are monitoring to make sure that we've got a system to progress monitor the students' progress. So a little more challenging, but we are attempting to differentiate the support dependent on the need.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Francine, any other questions?
Yeah, my other question was, so it wasn't in this update, but I just wanted to circle back on nutrition. And we had a question a few board meetings ago, like how will we know when we're really reaching all students? And I'm wondering what the progress was on that. There was a talk that there was going to be a lot of emphasis on reaching out more to families. I haven't received anything as a family, and I've asked other families. I haven't heard too much, and yet the family survey this week had a lot of questions about that. So there just seems to be a little bit of a disconnect. So I just wondered if we had some more information on nutrition, how we're continuing to do outreach, if we know we are meeting those needs.
Is Shamari
do you want
on? Or
do you want to take that answer, Here, or do you want to take that answer when we go to the engagement report? Because I think there is some information alluded to in one of the reports tonight. I mean, we could get an initial answer here and you could dig in more later. Do you want to do that?
Shamari, are you on? I know he was having microphone issues.
Well, if we
I'm back up.
want, oh,
Okay.
he's there? Great.
Go ahead.
Okay, can you repeat that? I'm sorry. I
I just wanted an update on nutrition if possible, because we had asked a few meetings ago, how will we know when we're reaching all students? There had been a lot of talk about doing additional outreach. I know you and I have spoken about that, but then, you know, where are we in that? And I've been asking, I haven't seen too much additional outreach, so was wondering what form that took. And then I did see in this last family survey that there was a lot of questions around nutrition. And so there just seems to be a disconnect with the various pieces.
Yeah, we're making a bunch of targeted efforts to ensure that our families within our communities are informed about nutrition. Everything from putting messages on the reader boards at the schools that have reader boards to sending out postcards in specific languages that we know we haven't sent intentional messaging out to before. We've had a series of robocalls that we've set forth. We have a second postcard that's going out pretty soon. We added messaging into our nutrition services lunch or meal boxes that families come and pick up, so that we can inform them on other resources, but also inspire them to inform family and other friends about the resources that are available. And so we're doing a fairly robust effort in communication in partnership with the communication department to ensure that our families are being served well. And so you might not see that personally because that information may not come to you directly, but trust that we are targeting families who are on our free and reduced lunch list, families who are a part of our title schools or schools that are close to title. We've targeted specific language groups where the first language in the family is other than English, such as Russian, a couple of languages in Indian, our Mandarin speaking families, our Spanish speaking families. And so we're putting a pretty large blanket effort out there to make sure that families are being served.
Okay, so thank you for those updates. And then I would just say that we know that there are families who are newly in need. We know that there are families who may not have been on our radar screen for a variety of reasons. There's also a lot of pride in just not accessing those services, and those people need to get the information as well. So appreciate all of the intentionality and trying to reach people, but also let's make sure that we continue to get that message out broadly. So those who may not be at a title school, may not have ever needed to access services before, still know about that. I know there's a lot of questions about whether we're going to have a summer meals program, and I've heard different things. So if we could just clarify today, we know the answer to that, that would be wonderful to get that message out too. I can semi-answer that. We don't have an answer to that because we're waiting to see what the federal government will do. They have waived they've extended the waivers regarding people being able to pick up more than one meal and a child not having to be present. They have not yet extended the waivers with respect to being able to deliver outside of the normal area, which means we would be limited to Lake Hills and Sammamish if they don't extend those waivers beyond June 30th. So we're waiting to hear. I know that the state has submitted asking the federal government to extend that waiver. Also, we do not have bus drivers that drive in the summer, and so that's another thing that we're going to have to tackle and look at. And so we are looking at offering regional locations for food throughout our community if that waiver gets extended. So more information to come, but we're kind of in a planning pattern
and don't want to publish things until we really know what's going to happen with the waivers.
So does that mean there will be a summer feeding program at minimum at Lake Hills and Sammamish, but potentially, hopefully, something more robust? Is that,
Yes.
would that be a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay, that's where the confusion came, because I thought I had asked you this a couple of weeks ago and you'd say, yeah, there will be a summer feeding. Okay, so what we're looking at is just the extent to how much service we can provide.
Yeah, I think what Melissa told us earlier is that there will be summer feeding, because we always have that as part of our services. What she didn't know and still doesn't know is how much extra funding we'll have to have waivers for some of the requirements that restrict it. So it sounds like the government has already relaxed a couple things, so that's good. So I think that Kelly was going to comment further from what we're learning so far from the surveys. Do you want to jump in on that, Kelly?
Sure. Yeah, real quick, just so you can know, I worked with Shamari reached out to me about adding some questions about basic needs into the survey, and so we did. I think what's really fascinating is by last Friday, so only after like a day or two of the survey being open, we had 58 families request support for basic needs. So if you answer yes, I need support, then it asks you to put your contact information. And so by last Friday, we had 58 families ask for basic needs support through the survey. And then today, there's a total of 131 families asking for support. So it's been fascinating to see people respond to the survey and ask for support. And it does show that we have an increasing number of families who are needing support over time. The other thing is, in the survey, we asked the question, we basically make a statement that Bellevue School District is providing a number of resources to families, including meals and things like that. How have you been hearing about that? And then one option being, I haven't heard about these resources. And I think what's really positive is only 1% of the respondents marked that they haven't at all heard about these resources. 95% said that they're hearing about it through emails from the district. But then the next largest groups are school principal newsletters. So they're getting a lot of information through school and principal newsletters. And then the next largest is from the teachers directly sharing that we've got the support, we can help your kids. And so there's some really positive data on where people are getting their information, but very few of the respondents said they haven't heard anything at all. So we do need to make sure that we're attending to that 1%. But in the meantime, they are getting it through multiple means. So
thanks, Kelly. For those new families, those 58 to 131 families that responded, do we have a sense if they are kind of hadn't been on the radar screen, so to speak?
It's just the question basically asked them, you know, as we continue in this time of COVID-19, more and more families are finding that they need support. So if you need support and you haven't received it yet, please let us know who you are, and someone from the FCC will contact you. So we did ask anybody who needs support, who's not currently getting support, let us know who you are. And then on an almost daily basis, I forward all that information to Shamari and his team, and then they are personally either calling or emailing based on the contact information that the family put in. But everybody who marked yes is putting their names, their contact information, and so it is stunning to us, because it's hard to ask for help, but families are asking, and I'm really glad that we put it in the survey as one more method. And then the families communities, the FCCs, they're also really promoting the survey as well. So we've asked them to really reach out to families and have them take the survey. So we're trying to reach as many families as possible.
Great. When does the survey close? I've been continuing to promote it, but didn't know when to say, make sure you do it by tomorrow.
We're going to close it this week, by the end of this week, because we're trying to do one more push with the FCCs to get as many families who visit the FCCs to take the survey as well. But we're going to try to close it off by Friday so we can start analyzing it and then share it out.
Great, thank you.
The only thing is the student survey, just so you know, we had to extend it a little bit because we sent out the links and everything for the student survey, but our high school kids are like in the middle of AP testing, and so we felt it was tone deaf not to give it more time for the high school kids. We want them to be laser focused on their AP test. So we're going to extend the deadline for the student survey to give the high school kids more time.
Was that till like Monday, or what's, if we're advertising for people to do it, what should we say for that?
So for the students, we're giving the students, the high school students, until I think, Patty, was it May 27th. So as soon as AP testing is over, we'll ask them how they're doing. So
Okay, so for elementary, middle school, and family survey, they should try to do it by Friday then?
by Friday. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. That was super, super helpful. Great questions, Francine. Erica, do you have any questions you want to throw out there?
Yeah, really kind of more like a comment. Thank you very much. I have some questions that kind of tie in more with the family engagement, and so I'll just hold off until then. You know, there's a lot of rumors going around, as Carolyn mentioned, like, and I'm getting a lot of questions from people entering kindergarten, like, what is this? What is going to happen? Like, because that's a new thing anyway. So what I would ask is that, if there's a place on our website or something where we can put like what is happening with as much detail as we know, and that includes what we don't know. We don't know what we're going to do. We have convened these work groups. We're doing this. We will tell you when we know something. Please do not assume that it's like, you know, whatever your neighbor said is going to happen, because we don't actually know. So we need to be really clear about what we do and do not know. And if we have a timeline for when we'll know something, that would be great too. But just getting that information out so that it kind of quells rumors and we stop getting angry emails about it.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I'll just say, Erica, we can definitely think about something we could put on the website, and just know that in the superintendent message last week, we did allude to the planning teams and the groups coming together. So we're starting to share some of that information, but it's definitely something that we can think about how we can be more robust in that area. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'd second that request and ask that it be sooner than later, even if it's not very robust to start, just that something that we can point to, because it's really hard to ask people to dig up an email that they received. Like that it's so much easier to say, oh, check out this webpage. You can get the information here, and we'll keep updating it. And then they can keep referencing that space, and they know as it goes if it's something they're worrying about. It's just super helpful. All right, Erica, any other questions?
No, not right now. Thanks.
All right, I have just a couple of questions that I will ask about the presentation. I just want to clarify the question I had for John, which I'll follow up with offline, is that what I saw in the data that you presented about student engagement, which was really encouraging, was that I saw that 2 of our student subgroups really ratcheted up their engagement over the last, from when we measured before to this week. And that was awesome. But the overall population stayed roughly the same. So what I was trying to understand is, if the average stayed the same and 2 groups went up, what groups went down? And I didn't get any clarity on that. So I don't need an answer now. If there is an answer to that, I'd love to just take it offline. Second question that I have is, there was a slide on the planning activities that really struck me wrong. So I want to make sure I'm not, maybe I'm misinterpreting it. Said if only 80% of our kids are coming back to school because the other 20% are not able to or are worried about it, will we serve them? And my thought was that question should be, how will we serve them, not will we serve them? Can someone clarify for me what the intention behind that question was?
It is, will we serve them? We will serve them. We will serve them. That particular work group is focused around simply the thought that, you know, if we were to come back and we had the majority of students in person, but a percentage who were not attending in person for whatever reason, and it could be a variety of reasons. It could be health reasons. It could be a variety of reasons. But how will we best serve them? So happy to offer that clarification.
Thank you. Heather, could we actually update the deck so that it says that? Because I would hate for our community to like
certainly
be that deck and be wondering if we were asking the questions of whether or not we would serve our students.
I agree.
Yeah. Christine, Dr. Chu, I now fully understand your question, and I will work with Jason Golick and Tech to get you an answer.
Yeah, just a quick one, because I just want to understand as we're going into planning and contingencies, and also in the work that we're doing for the equity reporting for the Cs committee, I just want to make sure that we are seeing all these things that are happening and understanding what the impacts are to the different subgroups in our schools, so that we don't miss anybody and we don't unintentionally say, oh great, we made some advances here, hooray. Oh wait a second, what about this group?
Right.
So let's yeah,
fully understand. Thank you, Christine.
Thanks. And then one question I had for Dr. Duran and Melissa is, for the contingency planning, where does operations show up in those scenarios? Because none of them have anyone from the operations teams, like the teams from the busing group and the nutrition services group, and a lot of our core groups that obviously are going to have to do all sorts of contingency planning pieces. Are they doing their contingency planning separate? Are they part of this? How do they fit in?
Yeah, so thanks for asking that, Christine. I actually had part of the reason why the note takers were in there was to document everything that was discussed, so that I could take it back to my ops folks and get their input and stuff. The issue is there's 4 of those teams. I've got only like one person in charge of busing, one person in charge of facilities, and they've got a lot of work that they're doing right now. And so they don't really have the bandwidth to attend 4 3-hour meetings. And so that's why we had the note takers participating, is so that then we could get them involved as the straw designs were coming together, so that it's not on the back end, and yet they're not in those meetings for 12 hours each.
Great. So there's a process to engage them and allow them not only to consume the info, but to actually give feedback to it.
Correct.
Awesome. And then another participation question. One of the things that has been really important and striking to me about this whole closure circumstance is, I have never seen us, and I've said this before, I'll keep saying it, I've never seen us this committed to understanding student engagement and to ensuring that students are engaging. We talk about it theoretically, we look at it as like a thing into itself. Right now, everyone is on board and worrying about whether or not students are connected and engaged and how they're doing. Teachers are involved, principals, the district staff, but even all of our classified staff. Not only have they jumped in with gusto, they've actually volunteered, and you were able to find more of them to help. And what I wonder is, as we do all this contingency planning, I wonder how those groups are being part of that contingency plan, so that they might rethink about their own, how their roles are orchestrated and designed, and how they might in the future continue to be part of supporting the engagement. And I'm wondering how their participation, not just top down, but bottom up, is being accounted for in the conversation.
Jeff, do you want to respond to the staff portion of that? And then I think, Christine, the other part too is that as we build out some of these straw designs and ideas, there's definitely going to also be a need for us to get input from our students around, things that have been working for them and suggestions and ideas that they have too. So I really feel we're in the beginning parts of some of that work now.
Excellent
Jeff?
Point. Yeah.
Yeah. Christine, thank you for asking that question. It connects to a lot of the behind the scenes work that Melissa's doing with operations and support with staff and going forward. But part of what we've been doing is meeting regularly with all of our union groups and our leaders. And specifically, we've used this as an opportunity to support leadership development for our staff to do just that, trying to figure out, okay, we're doing this problem solving now, but what does it mean for tomorrow? So what we're seeing is it's actually opened up the doors for people to exhibit leadership that they haven't been able to do before, and also in a way to consider doing work that they haven't done before. So our latest, as an example, is we have a lot of paras and GSAs that are really rethinking the work that they've done before around what do jobs look like that are going to be perhaps very different in the future.
That's excellent to hear. How are those folks connecting with the contingency process?
I think they're going to be connecting once the drafts are in a place for public consumption. An automatic step we have built in is they will go to the various labor management groups, so they get a chance to weigh in on that. So as an example, we have a real life one coming up around transportation, where we actually have to have a publicly displayed COVID contingency plan in order for us to continue to do training for drivers. So that's going to happen, I believe, even Thursday this week, where we'll have labor management work and input, and then here's the public design going forward.
And I think I just might add to that in terms of process, as we met with each of the work teams, part of in conveying the process to the work team itself, part of that included a list of departments that would, and different constituency groups that would need ongoing consultation as we flesh things out. This first session really was an innovative, get your thoughts out, what are we thinking, get the ideas compiled, and then transportation, nutrition services, our various employee groups, our director of health services, even though we have a nurse on each team, are all groups that we're going to need to, as we begin to flesh things out, have a feedback loop with.
Great, thank you for that. So I would just say that the more that we involve all hands on deck in the way we approach this and have everyone feel that they're not just consuming it, but they're actually invited to be part of the out of the box thinking, the better off we all are, because this is one of the biggest changes I've seen that mobilizes us as an entire district to really strive towards our mission, vision, goals, values in serving each and every kid. And I love what I see from our staff. So clearly they have beautiful and effective ways to contribute. And we just want to make sure we are leveraging, capturing, and thinking in those spaces. And I guess that is the other comment the input I have for the planning work is it's great that we have contingency plans for how far apart kids should sit and whether or not we should have half days for kids or alternate weeks or days or whatever, or all the myriad of options we have to consider in terms of addressing social distancing. I hope that right along with that, we'll be considering some of the lessons we've already learned about things that we're doing that are actually more effective for kids, some kids, all kids, and how do we continue that work, or how do we build on that work to change some things moving forward? Because this is an opportunity where we're all going to have to train for the contingencies anyway. So it's a beautiful place to inject something that we're all embracing and we're all working towards, and we can take a step towards. We can integrate it into the training we have to do. We can integrate it into the supports we have to provide. We're doing all that anyway. It would be a shame to just provide enough supports for the physical, the non-learning, non-student wellness pieces of contingency that are really just around disease management. But if we actually took it and took advantage of that, that's what I'm really excited to see. And the final question I have is for Patty, and that is just around the graduation, the Interlake thing. Love that the kids are all planning something, but that works for their schools individually. It seemed concerning to me when you said that they decided they're going to wait till December. I'm worried that isn't a truly inclusive solution, and I'm wondering, when you talked about the senior honoring night, is that going to be like their typical awards night where they just honor a handful of kids, 100 kids or 50 kids from the class, or are they transforming that event to be a pseudo graduation that is an actual recognition of each child, each student graduating in this moment? Before they're gone and off to other things, or before they don't have the resources or means to come back and reconnect.
Thanks for seeking that clarification, Christine. So the senior recognition on 6/16 at 5 o'clock is again the same day as their graduation, and they're going to replicate a lot of the ceremonial pieces for graduation, and each and every student in the class will be recognized. The pieces they're not doing are the turning of the tassels, a few little pieces, the presentation they want to formally, they're going to replicate as much as they can, but it is honoring every graduate in the program, in the class.
I might consider just a bit of feedback that instead of saying nothing until December and then having this honors thing called out when people won't have a clue what senior honors night is, instead describing graduation as part 1 and part 2, or graduation initial ceremony and graduation final graduation. It might make things more clear and make more people feel access and inclusion in the opportunities.
I appreciate that feedback. That we'll definitely do that. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Any other questions from board members that came up while other questions were being asked? Great update from staff. Very appreciated. We're going to take a 5-minute break. So it's 5:33. We'll be back at 5:38 and we will pick up with the Tier 1 report. Okay, well, we're gonna go ahead and sort of move towards getting started, but before we dive right in, let me just make sure everyone is back online since we're not in the same room together. I think we have Francine and Erica and Dr. Duran and Shamari. Carolyn, are you back? Okay, we're gonna just give a few more seconds there to Carolyn to come back, and then we'll get started. Shamari, are you about ready to start if once we're all convened? Thank you. Sounds like that's a yes. Okay, I think we're at 5:40. We said we'd be back at 5:39, so we'll go ahead and jump in, and we'll all just be ready for questions by the end. So this report has 40 minutes dedicated to it, so I assume that most board members have been able to look at it ahead of time. So Shamari, maybe limit the presentation to 10 minutes if possible, so that there's plenty of time for questions.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you so much. All right, you're up.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go over today the goal measure 5, family engagement, and our progress report on our 2019-2020 plan. So as we go through this document, we'll share that the goal was for families, particularly those who have been traditionally marginalized, are more supported and better able to find support and are more empowered to contribute to their students' success. And so on the team today who will be presenting are myself, Gargi Trishelle, Benjamin Roldan, and Naomi Calvo, who's helped us tremendously with our data pieces on this. As a part of this goal, we planned for doing a survey to access a baseline so that we can know how families felt in those 3 categories of feeling informed, supported, and empowered. As a part of this goal, we were to reach a 20% measure of feedback from our families within our Bellevue School District community. And you'll see in here the progress is red. The reason why this progress was red, because we did meet our 20% goal overall for our entire survey itself. However, we were unable to get 2 of our groups to fully answer the responses of the questions that were in the survey. One of those groups was our Black group, who responded at 12%. The other group is our Hawaiian Pacific Islander group, who responded at 15%. And the basis for our missing that benchmark and that goal is primarily due to us stopping the process of following through with continuing the survey as COVID-19 struck, and we shifted gears to be more responsive to the need within our community that was happening at that particular time. And so as we go through the rest of the survey, I'm going to switch gears here and give Gargi Trishelle and Benjamin Roldan an opportunity to present the data, and I'll be back at the end to give some update on our COVID responses. Lady and gent.
Next slide, please. Good evening. This is Gargi Trishelle. I'm pleased to share some of the results of this family engagement survey with you all. Overall, our response rate was at 23% for our survey. Our highest participation rate was from our Native American community at 28%. Our greatest number of responses came from our Asian community with 1,597 responses. These calculations reflect family response rates based on the oldest student at a school in the family. And for each of the racial groups, we see the target measure was met, except for, as Shamari said, our Black families and our families who identified as Hawaiian and Pacific Islander. Next slide, please. So digging in a little bit more, we can see that the number of students for each survey sample category and then the response rates that were highest were from our elementary school families and the lowest were from our high school families. Some of the highest response rates came from our families in our language immersion programs. Next slide, please.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. Benjamin Roldan, Family Engagement Coordinator for Equity and Strategic Engagement. So sorry, Gargi, that's your slide. I apologize.
That's all right. Our survey was comprised of two areas. The first area reflected education quality, and the second measured family engagement. 74% of respondents felt that they were extremely satisfied with the quality of education in the Bellevue School District. 65% of all families felt engaged by their school in ways that allowed them to feel informed, supported, and empowered to support their child's learning. The family engagement domain had 3 questions that rolled up into it. So the questions were, to what extent do you feel informed to contribute to your child's success? And 66% felt favorably. 64% felt that they were supported to contribute to their child's educational success, or to their child's success, and 66% felt that had favorable responses to how they felt about the school's view of them as a partner in contributing to your child's success. And that's how we defined empowered, as a partner in contributing to the child's success. Next slide, please.
All right, me again, Benjamin Roldan, Family Engagement Coordinator. Apologize for that interruption. So how informed do families feel? The overall response rate, as Gargi mentioned, was a 66% of families feeling favorably about being informed by their schools. Going deeper in the data, we can see those families that identified as Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, multi-ethnic, and American Indian have the widest gap, in contrast to those families that identified as Latino, Black, and Asian. Next slide, please. Thank you. How supported do families feel? The overall satisfaction of being supported is 64%. And we see that families that identified as white, multi-ethnic, Hispanic, Pacific Islander, American Indian are below to the overall, in contrast of those families that identified as Hispanic, Black, and Asian. Next slide, please. How empowered do families feel? Overall, family responded 66 favorably. The demographic breakdown analysis showed that American Indian responded at 88%, favorably followed by Black, Hispanic, and Asian, compared to Hawaiian feeling the least as partners to their student success, followed by multi-ethnic and white. Next slide, please.
So the survey had 2 open-ended responses. The first reflected and referenced the area of education quality and asked what 1 or 2 things school or district do to help increase the quality of education your child receives. The second open-ended response reflected the domain of family engagement and asked what the school or district could do to help the family feel more informed, supported, and empowered. Since many respondents put their comments into one or either of the open-ended comment boxes, we reviewed the comments holistically for our analysis. 3,483 open-ended comments were received, and a 20% proportional stratified random sample of elementary and secondary comments were used for the analysis of this section. The sample included 338 elementary respondent comments and 359 secondary respondents, and the analysis led us to identify some dominant themes. Next slide, please.
So in total, we review 697 comments. Half of these comments mention communication and involvement. Within this theme, we see that families want to have more communication from teachers. They mention topics such as updates on student progress, strengths and areas of improvement of the students. They also mention more information. What is the student learning? For example, curriculum, classes, courses offered, homework, rating. They also want to have more ideas, opportunities, and resources for families to be active partners in their child's education and be able to support them at home. Other major themes on the comments are, which we'll analyze in the summer, are instructional quality, curriculum, rating practices, homework, and navigating resources. Next slide, please. Here are some of the comments that families mentioned. I'm not going to read all of them. I'm just going to read one. More frequent communication of what my student is learning in class and how my student is doing. Example, do they need extra help? Question mark. Closed caption. Next slide, please.
So data from Panorama shows us heightened response rates at the onset of the survey and additional spikes as efforts were made to increase survey participation through reminders and phone banks. The COVID-19 pandemic created complications in meeting our goal since we scaled back our planned approach of survey outreach once the pandemic reached our area in order to focus on the immediate needs of families. In order to reach the goal of 20% participation, we needed responses from roughly 40 additional families who identified as Black and 2 additional families who identified as Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. Had the survey continued, we believe that we could have met these targets with continued outreach to these groups. Next slide, please. So the survey was translated into 5 languages. The Chinese translation was utilized 55 times and the Spanish translation 223 times. We reflected that with a growing immigrant community in our city and in our schools, it is possible that we did not select the languages for translation in order to best meet the needs of this annual measure. What I mean is that we have an emerging immigrant community who may identify racially as Black and speak French or Arabic or Somali or Amharic. We have communities who identify racially as Pacific Islander and speak Samoan, Tongan, or Fijian. And we chose to go with translating the survey into languages that are most often spoken by families, but we did not translate the survey into languages that could better give rise to the voices of our community who comprise some of our racial groups. Next slide, please.
So as a reflection, we have to say that being intentional in our efforts gave us the results of participation overall, especially for those groups that have been traditionally marginalized. In addition, traditionally marginalized families respond at a similar rate how they feel informed and supported to other groups. In contrast, Hawaiian and Pacific Islander responded less favorably compared to other groups in all areas. But this is especially relevant in how they felt as partners or empowered to contribute to their student success. Also, we see that as we continue our efforts of collecting qualitative data, we will be able to set direct strategies to the themes and topics in the comments and our overarching measures, which are informed, supported, and empowered. Although the survey took place during a COVID-19 or a pandemic, this had little to no significant impact on the survey results. Next slide, please. For adjustments for the survey, we would like to see more access to the survey. Since we only send this survey via email, we see that these impacted families that or not have an email or not know how to use an email. So providing wider access to the survey without disturbing or losing the validity of the data or the intentionality of the questions will be a great way to approach. Example, text messages, social media, or other forms that more traditional marginalized communities may use. We're trying new efforts to engage as reflection and adjustment. We think that one way to engage the form of phone calls was the best approach, and it worked perfectly with our Spanish community. So in that regard, we think that one-on-one conversations with families via phone will be a great way to engage with families, and not only with one specific group. We'd like to see this for overall families, different languages, and different groups. Next slide, please.
Okay, so we're a little bit over time. I'm going to fly through these last couple really quickly. As far as next steps, we have some work to do with our school improvement plan and our small SIP team, which has presented an opportunity for us to input information into next year's SIP around family engagement. So we'll be working alongside our principals and other administrators to deepen the information that you all have been presented today. As we look into, next slide. As we look at the Q4 goals that we have here, student well-being and talking about whether or not our free and reduced lunch families are being communicated with. We do have a goal around ensuring that all families have the information. Francine brought this up a little bit earlier. We've made it through ensuring that all of our free and reduced lunch students and families have been informed about opportunities. We're on round 2 of telephone calls directly to those families who are not already a part of a list of those who are being contacted by our family engagement specialists. Connecting with our most vulnerable students and families to provide resources. We've identified a bunch of projects that are helping us to ensure that not just the resource of food, but also technology, communication, and social emotional well-being are a part of our structure to make sure that our families are being served very well. And so we put together 4 small projects to make sure we're working alongside other departments within our organization to meet these needs. We want to ensure families who are newly in need of nutrition and other services are being discovered and have access to the resources and families. So we're working on not just calls, but postcards, emails, seminars, and other strategies to make sure that this information is being disseminated widely. When someone is on a community-wide Teams call, we make sure that there is input in that call at the end to inform folks of the opportunities that there are available in our organization. And we're still discovering new ways to make sure families are being made aware. And last, in our Tier 1 goals, all families understand and are able to access the information through various platforms. And so, as I stated a little bit earlier when answering Francine's question, we have a myriad of things from robocalls to our website to brochures that we have created and put in our FCC centers. We've got reader boards that are displaying and demonstrating the information. We have call-in numbers in the form of a hotline, etc. So we have a myriad of resources, knowing that we have yet to reach every single family member in our district, but that's the goal 100%. Last slide, we did do a community needs assessment in the very beginning that gave us some robust information. We had a phone bank where we called out to families, and these were the things that came up the most that helped us to frame the projects that we're working on to ensure that we are reaching the needs that the community has said that they want to have access to the most. That's it for our presentation. Sorry we went over a little bit. Thank you for your time. Any questions?
Okay, so we are both a little bit behind on the on our schedule as planned, but I think we're okay because I think we've got some open time in the end. But we still have, if we give this the full amount of time, we still have 20 minutes for questions, so we should be all right. Let's go ahead and start. No one from the board has chimed in that they have a question, so I'll just call randomly and say, Francine, do you have anything you want to start with?
Sure. I just wanted to go back to slide. So thank you, and we've had the opportunity to discuss this a little bit in our student instruction and family engagement committee meeting. So really kudos to the team and being able to pivot too because of the change. I want to go to one thing on slide 15, and then if there's comments about kind of going forward, that would be great too. So I realize I can't move it. So I think it's slide 15. So On the third bullet point here, it says these families responded less favorably compared to other groups when asked whether they felt like a partner to contribute to student success. And yet, when we look at the slide that shows those different groups, it seemed that they actually responded more favorably in terms of family engagement, except for one group. So, can you just, I guess, expand on the interpretation from the reflection, since the numbers and that reflection don't match?
Thank you for that catch. We just discussed this right before the school board meeting started today, and that's supposed to be just that one group that is showing a 29%, I believe, favorable rate of response, and so that needs to be corrected. We didn't discover it until most recently, so thank you for that catch.
Okay, so but do you want to maybe discuss just a little bit then? So in fact, when we look at it, so we have one group and it represented two families that felt less empowered, and then then for our traditionally marginalized families overall, because it looks like the margin of error rate for this is like 1 to 2%. Naomi can let us know if it's more than that, but that are actually responding much more favorably. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts about that?
I'm going to divert a little bit to Naomi because we had some discussion about this earlier and she has a much more eloquent answer.
Hello. So yes, Francine, you're right about the error rates. It is in the 1 to 2% range. The Hawaiian Pacific Islander sample size is so small that we haven't been giving that much weight. Until we get a larger sample from that population, I think it will be hard to draw robust conclusions for that group. In terms of the overall pattern that we're seeing, it is different than what we had anticipated. For most of the data that we see in the district, our historically marginalized groups tend to have lower all outcomes on average. Here, however, the subgroups often came out with higher percent favorable on the ratings in the survey than average. So yes, we see that pattern, and that is one of the things that we're going to explore in further qualitative analysis. We don't have an explanation for it right now.
Well, maybe we're doing good work. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Francine. So, Carolyn, do you want to add a question at this point?
Sure. I was thinking a couple of things. We were talking about maybe targeting the languages a little more, like Samoan or Somali, or and. So I have two questions. One is, when we do outreach to these to the underrepresented groups via phone call, to remind them to take the survey, or can we give them the survey conversationally, possibly in Somali or Samoan? And then the other thing is, for the ones that we really can't reach, I wonder, and I could be, I mean, I'm actually wondering, I'm not sure this would work, but maybe the tactic of an old-fashioned letter with a stamped envelope for a few people. I know we couldn't do that for everybody because the wasted postage if they don't return it, but just wondering.
Yeah, I'll take a first stab at that, and I welcome anyone else from my team to chime in. But originally, we took from the top languages that we know that our district has as far as population and first language within their home, to ensure that we were sending those surveys out in those languages of those particular parents and families. And if we were to go back a few slides, or just one slide, to slide 14, you'll even see that the response rate predominantly was English, Spanish, and simplified Chinese. And so this is a bit of a beta for us. I would love if in future opportunities, when we take a stab at this, that we translate into more languages and seek advocates within those communities to help us do communication out to our families, door knocking, telephone calls, one-on-one sessions with families so that we can hit a greater population of our community.
But would we be being able to like orally give them the survey? Like if you reach them on the phone, you've got them in that moment. And
we did do that this year. We actually did that with our Spanish-speaking community. We
Uh-huh.
commissioned the support of the promotores through Alma Gonzalez's group NISO, and they helped us greatly to ascertain survey responses. We outfitted them with iPads with the survey right on it, and they interviewed folks right there and helped them to answer the questions. And so it was a great beta for us, and we know that it's a function that could work as well if we were to use it for other groups.
if you can find, you know, speakers of all the languages, but great.
Wait, so in just to get further clarification on Carolyn's question and the fact that you've gone to this slide 14, I'm not sure I understand. If you could clarify for me how the groups that didn't respond at the rates that we wanted to see them and this language slide connect to each other. How does that information and this information inform our next steps? I'm not sure I get the learning.
There's no correlation between it. I was just saying that within this particular slide on 14, this was the response rate of the languages that we translated the survey into. We know that there are some groups who need the information translated more so than others, but my follow-up to that is I would love for us to translate it for as many groups as possible, as many groups as we have in the organization. We're going to have to put forth a concerted effort to find speakers that can aid us in tapping those families to fill out those surveys. But this is just an example of what we utilize as a resource to get information from those who listed their first language at home as being something other than English, of the top groups that we have. Okay. So I wasn't trying to make a correlation.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think it's good to also make the correlation to see where we can make that big bit of difference as well. Carolyn, you had said you had a second question?
I wondered whether, as a last resort, whether actually mailing a paper survey, old-fashioned, to people who maybe couldn't respond on email in their language would work, or maybe experience shows that wouldn't work. But I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, it might be a good way for us to consider in the future. We had some paper copies, not mostly, in the event that school building leadership found families that would be more comfortable with filling it out on paper. So we have them, and yes, we can mail them. I might defer to Naomi to just make sure that I'm right on that, because each of the surveys has to have the unique identifier for that particular family, and so it's a complicated step, but not an impossible step.
Right, to make sure your sample is representative and adequate and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the general feedback here is we all want to see more folks get them, and we're wondering how the data that we learned from here can inform how we can actually connect better with more people, not just more ideas to connect with more people, but we just learned a bunch. What did we learn?
And you might actually make people feel better, you know, in the sense if they get a phone call from the district in their language from a warm and friendly voice that is asking their opinions and seems like they really want to know, that might actually, you know, make them feel better about things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed.
Yep. All right, Erica, any questions?
Yeah, just a couple. I can't remember where I read, or maybe we talked about it in psych, but we were using the family engagement centers at the schools in the beginning to try and engage families in this. Is that correct, Shamari? You're nodding. Okay. And then I know that they were sort of repurposed for food and connections during the COVID crisis, but do you have any sense from those groups, like about who was missing and how successful they were in connecting with these families?
A little bit of sense that I have is that they targeted the families that were on their caseload, for lack of a better term. A lot of families who they know for a fact had experiences of trauma or crisis in other areas, i.e. Food deserts or food needs, rental assistance and other housing needs, etc., were less inclined to be concerned about filling out a survey than those who are in positions of greater access. And so they helped out tremendously in making sure the information was disseminated and distributed in the middle of their normal traditional jobs. But they only spoke to the fact that there are a lot of families out here who are more concerned about things that are in alignment with their basic needs than they are with the survey itself.
Thank you.
Erica, you said you had a couple questions.
Well, it's sort of more of a comment on, and we're over time, but just looking at sort of the results of the survey and what families are saying, especially in this like environment of remote learning where I am somehow in charge of my daughter's advancement, you know, the comments about engagement with the teachers and things, I would really like to see how the district and the schools take a look at that and how they can really engage families, especially if we have at least partial remote learning in the fall.
Mm-hmm. And I only my response comment is, and I really want Naomi to talk about this one as well. We will be doing greater in-depth understanding and disaggregation of the anecdotal data that was given to us through the survey, but also I'm really appreciating all the information that Kelly Aramaki and team have been working on and getting intermittent data during the process of this COVID experience. And so there could be some opportunity for overlap in that data to view sort of new pockets of information that we did not ascertain through this particular survey.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And Erica, while we're over time on the meeting, we're not yet over time allocated to this particular topic. We still have 8 minutes.
Great.
So I'm going to ask a couple of questions. I also sent questions in previously, so I would ask that those questions be answered offline so that all the board gets those answers, maybe in an extra slide or two that can be added to this so we can put it where all the public can see it as well. I'm going to ask a few of those questions right now. The first question, if you go to slide 3, there are 2 pieces of N. One is that there's 20% family satisfaction survey participation, and the other goal for this annual goal for this year is that we develop a baseline and target measure for N for the overall strat plan. And there's no mention of progress on that in this report. Can you comment a little bit about status of that?
Yeah, we have some work to do still. We had some, of course, delays with our COVID response that has caused us to take our foot off the gas pedal with regard to doing a deeper dive into the information that we received through the survey. And so we aren't yet ready, but what we're going to do as we continue to do this particular work around deepening our understanding of what our community responses are, we're going to commission the support through the school improvement plans of our building leadership to help us to identify that target goal. Naomi, you want to add anything to that? We also talked about this in depth earlier.
No, that summarizes it nicely. Thanks.
Okay, it would be great then if we could get an update on that in the I guess we'll see it in the annual plan process and make sure that it's included in the goals. I would comment and say that just a reminder of something that many board members have expressed a couple times in the past is that our end, you know, and I thought the staff's end too, I think we're all on the same page on this, is that getting response rates on surveys is not really our goal here. It's an indicator of how connected people are feeling to our communities. And what we really want to understand is how connected our different communities and sub-communities are feeling to the district and how much access they have to resources and supports and participation. So as you develop the measures and goals, please do keep that in mind, because I know that came up from multiple board members a couple times saying, is this the only measure? Should we have something else? So I think N is the opportunity to actually get us focused on that connectivity point and beyond the survey. So since there's no material here to comment on, I just want to make sure that we're all staying on the same page on that.
Yeah, and that's our goal as well, Christine. We're really eager, we were really eager, but are still as eager to get better information that tells a better story about the information we just presented, so that we can ensure that our measures and goals are on point, sort of in conjunction with what people or how people define informed, supported, and empowered based on how they responded.
Great, thank you for that. So we'll ask another couple quick questions. One is that I didn't see anything in here on data from last year so that we could see the difference in participation of subgroups, and it would be really helpful to get that data. So I assume you don't have it on the top of your head, so I'll just say that that is one of the things that the board can look for additional information to. Is that true? You'll be able to get that information?
Yeah. I think we should address that. Naomi has an answer for that, because we did go through your questions and wrote up a response. We just need to get it to you and the rest of the school board members.
Okay, so, Naomi, is there a highlight from that one that maybe we can share with the board? Thank you.
The short answer is we don't have data from last year. Last year, we did a very small scale pilot and there was no focus on response rates. And because we did it through Survey Gizmo rather than Panorama, we can't calculate comparable response rates anyway. So we don't have data from last year for response rates.
What data do you have from last year? Because I think we have something that we can look at. Do we have absolutely no demographic data on response rates?
What would be the point of looking at that information?
I think that there are ways to look at it qualitatively as well as quantitatively, and while it may not be quantitatively significant, understanding the different how different things are relative to one another, even in the same within the same survey, like last year's versus this year's in terms of ordering, like that's a qualitative comparison that I'm not sure that there's any issue with making.
Last year we did a very small scale pilot. There was not a coordinated effort about response rates. The purpose of the pilot was to test the questions themselves. There were demographic questions at the end. Many parents did not fill them out. They left them blank. So we do know what % of responses were from different demographics, knowing that there's a lot of blanks in those, but I don't see how that is helpful to compare to this year when it was a very different survey. It was much shorter. There was a coordinated central effort around response rates, at least initially before the pandemic. We have a different way of gathering demographic information and we're calculating response rates differently. So it would be an apples to oranges comparison. I'm happy to share it with you if you'd like to see it, but I would not draw any conclusions from it.
I think if the pilot data doesn't tell us anything, that's fine. But then I would want to know from the previous surveys that came into play that we've done in the past, are we making a difference in who we're reaching? So do we have demographic information from the past so we can see a difference in who's participating in surveys? And if I mean, it's hard for me to accept that the answer is no. Maybe the answer really is no, but I'm not looking for a statistically perfect comparison. I'm looking to understand how our community has responded in the past and how that may have changed.
I don't have information about those off the top of my head. I wasn't involved in running those surveys, but I can look into it and find out.
Yeah, if you can find, if there's a piece of data that we have in the past that helps us understand if we've made a change, that would be a really helpful thing to know. And it may not be a perfect comparison, but if there's something that helps us understand the puzzle. And the third question that I'll just put forth on the this engagement is that we had a lot of reflections about Latino families, but what I saw is that it was the Pacific Islander and Black families who weren't responding at the rates that we had hoped, and I didn't see them highlighted in the analysis. And conversely, it wasn't clear to me all the work that the Promotores group did. It was quite an amazing effort that they made. We heard about it at the board meeting. We've seen evidence of it. The response rates for the Latino families seem very high compared to the other groups. You know, they seem in the top 2. So I didn't see anything in this report that would help me understand if that indeed that work did pay off, or like, so I'd like to understand how analysis was done and looking at the different subgroups and where our relative successes were one to the other.
Gergi, I want you to address the first part of this question.
the first part of the question as in the part about NISO, part about
the response rate, our Black community and our Hawaiian Pacific Islander community.
Oh, okay. Well, what we felt was that outreach to these communities, had we been able to continue, because we were able through Panorama to get really specific information about the rates as they were coming in, we could have really worked to make sure that the 40 additional families that we needed for reaching that 20% target measure could have been reached out to. We had partnered with PABS and reaching some of the members of their group. And as for the Hawaiian Pacific Islander community, we needed 2 additional families to reach that 20% threshold. And after the pandemic changed things, we just shut down in terms of reaching out to these families. And I just feel that had we continued with our targeted outreach to these communities, we really could have met that 20% goal. So it was less than 45 families overall that kept us from reaching that target.
And just for the record, Christine, the target is the target. We really want more responses from more members of each of these racial subgroups within our community. And so we don't want to limit ourselves to just this 20% goal, you know, in future efforts. We want to make sure that we're reaching far more people than we reached in this particular survey.
Thank you for that. And can someone comment on the level of the work that Promotor has put in this year? Did you guys have to do as much outreach for getting those families to respond to the survey, or was that happening more organically because of all the other outreach, or did Promotores do the survey? Like, how did that all fit into it? Because it sure seemed like a big investment for us, for our families.
Yeah, the Promotor showed up, and I want Benjamin to speak to that because he's been the liaison for them this year.
Thank you. So yes, it's been a coordinated effort with NISO. We initially started conversations about the project, and kind of their mode of work is co-creation. So we meet with Alma Gonzalez, which is the president and CEO, and kind of created based on our goals, kind of the approach. And from there on, we start moving different pieces and understanding how communities react. Basically, we set weekly meeting, and in each meeting we discuss the strategies put in place for that week and see how they resulted. And we see that the ones that were the strongest was the phone calls, right? Even though they were talking to family members at their schools, they were talking to family members through their networks, and also in public spaces such as stores, churches, and other areas. But we definitely see a big impact, and you can see that on slide, let me see, slide, 1 second, please. On slide 13, yeah, thank you, Vargi. On slide 13, where we did some phone calls on those dates, 9th and 10th and 11th, and we see a spike of results. And this is not only because NISO was doing the phone calls, and in addition here to this answer is that we were super targeted on how we were going to call. We knew that the families were going to answer better if they were calling from a district phone number. We also knew that if we call in the evenings, there is most likely to do it. And to somebody's comment, if they do it in their language, it was also favorable. And also giving it access to be able to answer the survey while they were in the phone. That was also a really important strategy. So yeah, we see the spike in those places. And we also send a reminder on the 12th about the survey. So those are some of the things that we see as beneficial, and some strategies that we'll like to try again in the future.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. We may have a few more questions we'll send. And if you guys can just update the deck with the answers, and there was something else that needed to be corrected or something, I believe. So if we just get that updated one into the board materials, that'd be helpful. This is a lot of good information, and I appreciate your patience in answering the questions and trying to get creative with me about how do we how do we see where we're going? And I know part of the answer to that Naomi didn't get a chance to say is probably that this is a baseline year in some ways, and that next year we'll see if we're making progress. But it feels like we've already made a lot of efforts and investments this year, so it would be nice to see if some of it was already paying off, because I want to acknowledge, especially since a lot of those were done with community partners, the impact of their work and the importance to our community, so that we can keep that going. So thank you for this. Board members, if you have additional questions, please just send them in to Jen or to Ivan, and we'll get those compiled so Shamari gets everything and can respond. Thank you guys, this was great. So I'm going to go ahead and motion that we accept the report as presented, keeping in mind that a red score usually means a follow-up report, but this late in the year, I'll also motion that we accept the report as presented and assume the follow-up will be included in the final report for the year on the annual plan and not as a special report for this area only. Can I have a second on the motion?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion about the motion? Questions, thoughts, input? Okay, anyone who has opposition to the motion as presented to accept this report and to accept its follow-up as part of the complete annual plan summary report at the end of the year? Any opposition? All right, consider this accepted. Thank you guys so much. We're going to move on. We have about 20 minutes allocated for each of the presentations and questions. I know board members take a lot of time to go through these ahead of time, so if we could keep the highlights to about 5 minutes on each of these following reports, and I will probably cut you off at 6 minutes so that the board has time to ask questions because there's so much important content. Will that work, Dr. Duran?
Yep, that'll work. So I just ask everybody that's going to be presenting to hit that 5-minute mark. That'll be wonderful.
Thank you so much. All right, so then we're going to go ahead and start with mentoring. Who's going to lead us through that one?
That'll be Judy Buckmaster.
All right, Judy, you're up. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Okay. This report is an amalgamation of several approaches to providing supportive adult relationships to students, as well as an opportunity to look at challenges that need some adaptive solutions. And the results included in this report present an opportunity for us to look at further alignment within the district to include mentoring as a way to promote student well-being and possibly academic success. There is an opportunity to continue to develop systems that empower our community partners as well to contribute as we state we want them to do in our strategic plan. Next slide, please. So you can see that the measure is red, and that has to do with, yes, the goal was not met. This is the first year that we collected individual student data on one-to-one mentoring. And if you were to look at the appendices, which I assumed you all did, you will see that there's been quite an evolution of mentoring over the past 2 years, and it actually was even before that. So each year has had its own set of challenges with changes in personnel and reorganization. And so this report is about a couple of different efforts to keep mentoring going. With the way the goal was written, we did not meet the goal. However, I don't believe that that demonstrates that students weren't well served with adult relationships. Next slide, please. The goal was written to demonstrate that students would be on track towards graduation. The way of noting whether or not students are on track towards graduation is to know whether or not they're accumulating the number of credits they need to accumulate per semester. And this, if you had time to examine it, is not necessarily a great way to demonstrate that students are overcoming their challenges and forging on, staying resilient towards the goal of graduation. Next slide, please. These are the organizations that are involved. the number of student participants has nothing to do with the quality of the program. It has everything to do with how long the program has been involved in the district and or how they serve students. Next slide, please. This shows you participation by high school, which is highest at Interlake because of a program that is housed specifically at Interlake, and then second highest at Sammamish because of a program that started there, as most of our mentoring programs from the partner organizations started in the Title I schools and the title and their feeder programs. Next slide, please. Here is a breakdown by gender and race and ethnicity. Next slide. And program services, you can see that the majority of the students do qualify for free or reduced lunch program. Next slide, please. And here are some finding statements that you've already read. Next slide, please. Reflections, there are individual stories to be learned, of course. On track to graduate as measured by the number of credits earned each semester is a narrow assessment, but it is an important assessment. Do not hear that it doesn't matter. It does matter, and every one of our partner organizations is aligned to our strategic plan with the end goal of having all students successfully graduate. However, the way we track that and the way mentor research suggests that we track it is not necessarily by the number of credits earned, and that's something that the group has been looking at. Next slide, please. These adjustments are important if this effort is going to continue and if the partner organizations are going to continue to work together. Next slide, please. There are appendices that talk about the evolution of mentoring. I'd like to look at that next page, please. And you can see that last year there was 1.73 FTE leading this program. This year there is no FTE leading this program. And how it turned out this way is Randy Nunez, Dr. Randy Nunez, who was hired to lead our mentoring work in the fall of 2018, moved in the fall of 2019 to an equity specialist position. He maintained the group mentoring as best he could, given all of his other duties. And Eastside Pathways, who had been convening this group of leaders around one-to-one mentoring, put their work on pause while they moved through the phases of their strategic planning. And the group asked me if I would continue to convene them so they could continue to do the work together in an effort to promote systems in our district that would support the work of mentoring organizations in our schools. And so I agreed that I would continue to meet with them, and that's how these two different efforts continued. So group mentoring went to the equity specialists with Dr. Nunez, and I kept the community groups meeting until January, when we had just started talking about what kind of measurements we wanted to put in place as a collective group, what the progress monitoring would look like, what the year-end reporting could look like, because every organization did things a little differently. But as a group, they agreed they wanted to work on that together and come up with a sustainable system that they would all agree to use. Next slide, please. And the rest of this is relevant research. And Mike, could you go to the very last slide? Oh, well, okay. That's fine. I can end there for questions. I do want you to know that, oh, there it is. So these are the things that we started working on as a partner organization team. And this is where they would like to pick things back up once we get through COVID, because once COVID hit, everybody in those organizations, including myself, pivoted to making sure that all of the students who were being mentored still had contact with somebody from the mentoring organization, as well as knew about academic supports and food and basic needs resources. So you do now have in board docs several additional slides that let you know what we've been doing since the pandemic hit. And just to summarize, basically, our work became making sure that the students who were in both of the mentoring programs knew about supports that were available, and we could make sure that if they needed food or if they needed hotspots or if they needed computers, they got them. So there is some data there about how we're keeping track of the kids and what they've received so far. So I can leave it there and take questions. Christine, thank you for the questions you submitted. They were all spot on as far as what's been going on. That's really hard to put in this report because, like I said, it's an amalgamation of a couple of different efforts. So I appreciate you asking those questions, and it gave me an opportunity to respond to those. So we can take questions from here.
Thanks, Judy. So let's see, Carolyn, do you want to start us off this time?
Just a second, I'm having a technical moment.
Oh, of course.
Oh yeah, no, I was trying to look at that PowerPoint that I think answered one of the questions that I had. Yeah, two things about this presentation. One, I really appreciate the way you explained the program, because I hadn't understood about the equity specialist area doing certain area of the mentoring and the community partners doing the other area, because my question was going to be, how do those two connect? So we got that already in there. What are the partner organizations that do mentoring, and how does just an ordinary community member, like we used to have under Vibes, like a retiree or a parent with some extra bandwidth, how do they connect with them if they want to volunteer as a mentor?
I love that question, Carolyn. One of the things that we were working towards as a group was making sure that our community knows that those organizations are available. The plan is to have community members go through those organizations. So that would require us having a presence on our website of, if you want to serve in X capacity, these are the organizations through which you would be able to do that. They are partners with us in this work.
Okay, so you're going to have that on the website eventually, so we'd be able to find it.
Eventually, yes. The challenge right now is mentoring by virtual mentoring.
Yeah, remote.
Has its own set of challenges, both legal and otherwise. So we're not jumping towards that quite yet.
Yes. Yeah, no, I understand.
Okay.
Thanks, Carolyn. Francine, do you want to jump in?
Yes. Sorry. Okay. Clicking the wrong button here. So thanks for the presentation. I guess I'm still not clear on how the students are selected. Is it because when I count up the students in the high school, there's 127 students, and then there's 137 students listed that are in the mentoring by partner organizations. And then we heard earlier tonight that there were 450 seniors that benefited from having interventions. And granted, I see there's a difference between mentoring and the services that we're offering for the seniors, and that we're now expanding to other high school and middle school students. But I guess I'm still not clear on how the students are identified, who gets a mentor, really what role the district is playing, since it seems to be that it's all going through these partner organizations and we're going to direct community members to partner organizations. Like what our investment is, aside from mentioning that Dr. Nunez and yourself were leading partly the group and then partly these one on the community. So I guess I still struggle with clarity on what our program is. You mentioned that the goals really weren't clear, so we didn't really know what the measurements are. There's a statement that says that the partners want to work on things in italics together differently. I'm not sure what that means either. So I will say that overall, it sounds like from the appendix that the benefits of mentoring are proven. We certainly have students who could use those, and yet I struggle to see how the programming that we've had so far and what we might be planning in the future actually achieve those.
There were a lot of questions in there, and so I'm not sure where to begin. I would be happy to talk with you offline if that would be helpful and walk you through it all and answer specific questions. If there's a specific question you'd like me to answer without trying to explain to you the whole program, I'm not sure where to start.
Judy, I think when I hear Francine talking about this, and I hear her talk about it a lot, it's one of the things that she's brought up multiple times, worrying about how extensive our mentoring program is. And I think the question that is being asked is, how are we deciding philosophically who this program is aimed at? And then once we decide that, how are we determining which students should actually be included and given access to it is one of the questions that I hear coming up. And then the second thing that I hear, well, I'll just leave it there first.
Sure. Okay. I think absolutely that hits the issue, right? That's the nail right there. Hits the nail on the head. We need to decide as an organization, what do we want mentoring to be and for whom do we want it? This is something that we have, we've had mentoring, tutoring, volunteering. We've had all of this in the district for a long time, and it's looked a lot of different ways. This is a discussion that we will have as a leadership team regarding what is it we want? How does this fit in our work for kids? Patty Sigworth and I have spent time together talking about how does a supportive adult relationship work into the graduation success plan. And I met with that team just last week to talk about the difference between tutoring and mentoring and how we need tutoring as an academic intervention in the graduation success initiative. Mentoring is not necessarily tutoring, it can be. And we need to decide as an organization, what do we want mentoring for our students? And if so, for whom and at what levels? And then once we make those decisions, we need to decide whether or not that is something that we want to staff and have the appropriate resources to maintain. Does that answer the question?
Get somewhere for you?
It does help a little bit. I guess I maybe was hoping that the report might answer some of those questions. So Judy, you cut out a little bit, at least for me. I heard maybe the end of a phrase that said the leadership team might be making some of these decisions, or is this a strategic type of decision that you would like the board to weigh in on? Because it is, how are we best serving students? How are we making sure we reach each and every student? So that would be.
Go ahead, Dr.
This
Graham.
is Ivan. Yeah, so I would say that this is definitely something that we as a leadership team have to decide and think more about, because one thing that's really become apparent around this is that we have some amazing community partners that are doing some wonderful work in the one-to-one mentoring space, and we need to really utilize their services and actually really incorporate them into the graduate success plan. I think that's really important for us to really make sure that they are incorporated into the work that we're trying to accomplish for our students in that space. And right now it's kind of been a little separate, and so we can't have things being separate. They have to all fit together. And so we definitely want to be able to utilize our partners in a better way. I think the other thing we do have to decide is that we do know that at some level within the organization, we have to have some way and somebody helping to support this coordination with our partners in this work, making sure that they're really clear about how are we going to measure the overall success of mentoring? Because we know it's important. We have tons of research that proves that it's important. And then I do think there is still decisions to be made around how students gain access to the mentoring and know about the mentoring. I do know there will definitely be capacity issues when we think about that from our partners, but I do believe that because there's so much benefits to it, that if we find a way to first just get them on board with the overall work that we're trying to do, that it'll continue to be able to expand. We'll be able to provide more mentoring to more students.
So in light of that, just to sort of circle back to Francine's question about strategic versus operational, I think that what I hear from this, there's a great opportunity for this to come back in the annual plan for next year, which I think you're already thinking about doing. Right. The things that seem absent to me aren't getting other programs aligned to our general vision, mission, values. I think they're getting them aligned to clear goals and outcomes that we're all tracking together and keeping track of. And while the research says that mentoring has great success, we have 2 years of investment in this mentoring program and partnership that isn't paying off based on the outcomes we were hoping for. And we do, I think, hope that kids who are mentored will engage better and have better well-being. So if there's some way to make sure that in the annual plan goals for this department area, there's clarity around the academic and well-being goals, and then in the execution, that all partners involved are tracking to those goals and being part of it, which I think is what you tried to speak to in the alignment space and in this idea. But I think that the thing that brings all of us together is real clarity on the shared outcomes and expectations for the program, whether it's the partners or the board or the district. And I think the process for that, Francine, is that they use their expertise and their feasibility and their knowledge of the partners and so forth to come back with that plan to us, and then we can see those goals. Judy, does that resonate with you for where this would go next? And Dr. Duran?
Yes, that's exactly what we've been planning on doing and thinking about. But again, it's also for us thinking about from even staffing perspectives and what kind of impact that's going to have and decisions we have to make. So we will definitely be putting that into what's next for our annual plan.
Francine, does that address your thinking as well?
I think that helps a lot. The other comment I would have is that as we've pivoted during the COVID crisis and we have outreach of staff one-on-one to students, it sounds like when I'm hearing the community that there are some of these mentoring type relationships that are developing. So for example, at elementary school, so not just in this high school space. And so I'm wondering if we are identifying that as such as a type of mentoring relationship, and if we're taking some lessons learned from that, whether it be for remote learning in the future or what success is there, especially since we may be capturing students much earlier. And from the limited data that I could see here, it did seem like the earlier students seem to have a little bit more success, but it was really difficult to tell because there aren't a lot of details.
All right, great. So we've got that additional feedback. So when those goals come out, trying to get the full alignment in the efforts would be great. Erica, did you have anything you wanted to throw out at this one?
No, Carolyn asked my question. Thank you.
And I just wanted to say that I like the way Christine reframed everything, because I think the point is understanding the goals of the program and getting them into the annual plan so that we can get a handle on what's going on and how to measure it.
Yeah, and I really appreciate great questions and input from everyone, but also just great frankness from the staff and sort of saying, this is where we weren't successful and we're taking a step backwards. So this is terrific. I'm going to propose or make a motion that we accept this report as presented, and that as with the other report with the red in it, that we will take the follow-up through the final annual plan summary report. Can I have a second?
A second.
Thanks, Erica. Any further questions, discussion, concerns about that? Okay, anyone opposed to the motion? Anyone opposed to the motion? All right, no, barring opposition, this has passed. So I do ask twice because I think that's part of the rules of order or something, just to make sure that I don't skip ahead too fast. So we're going to go to presentation, and we are, of course, still off time a little bit. I'll try to keep us back on if we can. Who's presenting next?
I believe Marilyn Hanselman's going to be leading this one.
Fantastic. Thank you, Judy, so much for the big presentation on community development.
All right, am I ready to go? Hi, and thank you for having me here this evening, actually. I want to go over the presentation of the Tier 2 goal of increasing computer science enrollment. And I went ahead and looked at the comments that were made by the board or by the school board and went ahead and made those corrections so that way you will have a better idea of where we are and where we're going. My goal was to increase by 10% or more underrepresented subgroups of students that would enroll in middle school computer science. For the females, we didn't meet the goal. For Black or students who identify as Black, we did not meet that goal. But for our Hispanic and 2 or more races, we did hit the goal. Next slide. There was a question in regards to what is computer science. And I know that too often we refer to computer science as just coding and merely coding, but in the field of CTE, or actually in middle schools, we try to provide students the opportunity to see the many options and opportunities available to them and to get a taste of all kinds of coding and computer experiences prior to high school and prior to post-secondary education, so that way they can see what is out there and what's available. We know that in coding and CS Discoveries and Python, that is strict coding. But when you look at applied engineering, design and production, robotics and flight and space, students are learning Arduino, they're looking at Vex block coding, they're doing robot mesh Python coding. And so there's a great deal of coding going on along with the computational thinking. In our software applications programs, this year we are piloting virtual reality and augmented reality, and students are learning Unity, and that's going to be taken out to all of the other schools after this year. They also do a great deal of work in Dreamweaver and Adobe software. And all of those you can do back coding and look at the coding language and be able to manipulate software that's already developed. And so the goal really is to introduce students to all aspects of computer science and the multitude of opportunities available to them after they leave our middle school programs. Next slide. As I said, we didn't meet our goal of 10%, but we did get 7% increase for our females. Next slide. Go to the next one after that. I updated that. For our next one, I broke it down. For our Black student population, we increased by 2%, far less than I had hoped, but our Hispanic went up 16% and 2 or more races went up 13%. Next slide. Here is the spreadsheet that shows all of the courses listed, broken down by male, female, Black, Hispanic, 2 or more races, and then the requested total of individuals who applied for the program or the courses. Next slide. Therefore, I updated the data summary sheet to reflect the actual information in respects that females and students who identified as Black, we did not meet the 10% increase. However, for females, we did increase by 7%. For our Black population, it increased by 2%, Hispanic by 16%, and 2 or more races by 13%. Next slide. We did notice that in the Python 2 and flight and space, we had a significant increase in all the focused areas. Next slide. And then when we analyzed the information, we were really hoping to see if our title schools had an increase in enrollment. And the reason why was that this year between the computer science specialists at the elementary school, our college and career advisors went to those schools and met with all of the students until COVID-19 hit. So we were able to hit half of the schools. So we're going to get the data to see if it had an impact, but we're really focused on introducing them to the many opportunities in the area of computer science, from from database or software development to art and animation to video development. So just a wide spectrum. We also had all our college and career advisors go to every 5th and 8th grade classroom and speak to every student and provided them a college and career, a CTE career pathways book. And then we also sent out information to parents, and we sent information out to all our McKinney-Vento parents. And we also had all of the information at our elementary translated into Chinese and Spanish. So that way, when it went out to the community, everyone would have an opportunity to see what we had available. Next slide, please. At the elementary, just for an update, they have provided weekly lessons on computer science activities for the whole Bellevue School District community, as well as outside communities. And there are examples on the website. Next slide. We also had in our marketing classes, students who have had computer science at the middle school came up with some website. It's called Bellevue Bites, which was highlighted in King 5 News. Next slide. And then some of the other things we've done since COVID-19 in our video classes, students are making do with phone technology and a lot of the different apps available to them to create videos. Teachers have taken advantage of many of the, because we have CTSOs or club activities, there's been some national club activities and competitions that students could be a part of. Our engineering program looked at SolidWorks as an opportunity for students to learn more about engineering since we didn't have the lab space. And we've done that with all of our other programs to ensure that we are providing the best opportunity for our students. All the college credit courses we went through and worked with the college professors to ensure that college credit would be provided to all students this semester. If you go to slide 20, I know that one of the directives was about how each program did. And so I broke down every single course and then the number of females, Black and Hispanics and multi-ethnic students that signed up for the program for every single class. So that was more apparent, more easy to understand. And then the very last slide on this deck is the video that we used with our students during our presentations of a young lady who wasn't interested in necessarily coding, but then through coursework and talking with her classmates found the meaning of computer science in a roundabout way. And a lot that was very well received by our students that saw the presentations.
Thank you, Marilyn. This is great information. Right before we take questions from the board, I just want to point out that there are a few additional pieces of data that will be coming to us to round out this report. There was a tremendous effort put into looking at what we had available, and so there are a few other ones, and I just want to call them out. So first of all, there's going to be a breakdown of the, there's going to be a way to make sure that we can compare all subgroups to the data. So enrollment for all subgroups so that we can see, we know that enrollment went up overall. So then the question becomes, is enrollment going up proportionately? How are these groups doing? That wasn't the actual goal that we were looking at this year. We were looking for that 10% increase. So that's great, but we're also going to get the data on the comparative among all subgroups. Secondly, we're going to get the comparison in that same space that'll give us what Marilyn was just showing us is that data on all the different groupings of the courses. So either by course or with the science and engineering design type courses versus the two application courses. So we'll be able to discern the difference in those. And then we'll get some data that help us look a little bit more deeply on how enrollment was impacted by a few things. One is the Title I schools investment that we had, which had the extra after school activities at those schools, and also the computer science specialists at those schools. And then the other thing that was talking about just which schools were visited or had an impact. So we'll see the difference, the data coming on that. So if you have questions on that, there is data coming. But other than that, what questions can we take? Erica, do you want to start us out this time?
Sure. Just a quick one on the goals. Is there a ceiling that you would expect for the percentage of students enrolled for any particular subgroup? I asked because you indicated that the goal was not met for Black students because it only went up 2%, but they're at 89% enrolled, which, I mean, I don't see how you're going to get 97% of anybody to enroll in any particular class. So.
Well, that's a great question, and it was a very difficult one. I mean, it said 10%, so the goal was 10%. But if you look at our data, there is, I'm not sure which, we would have to go back. But if you look at King County data versus Washington State data, there we go, right there. And I think it goes back to computer science. There's another one that says computer science. And then you look at our district, we far exceed in every one of the categories, in every realm. We have a phenomenal CTE program. We have outstanding instructors, and we are really definitely pushing the limits of everything. If you look at the data that I have to provide Washington State for the end of year report, we always find that in non-traditional programs like our automotive, construction, things like that are predominantly male dominated. If you look at teaching and you look at the culinary arts, they're pretty much female dominated, and nursing as well. And in computer science, it has been traditionally male dominated. That is just a national trend. So it's really hard to exceed when you're already at an 80+%, but I mean, we can only keep trying. Maybe we can hit 100%, but it will be hard. But thank you.
Yeah, Erica, the other thing on that too is that, like, while we have that 80+% across the board, that's part of why we'll get the data to look more deeply at the different subcategories so that we can understand, like, okay, our girls seem to be signing up in droves for the video production class, but how about the engineering class, or how about this class, just to get a deeper look at where it is that we are not seeing the different subgroups of kids get interested. And that's why I really appreciated the thoroughness of this report, because like you said, Marilyn, our district is pretty phenomenal in both the delivery, but also the participation in these pieces. All right, so Francine, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So thank you for the report, and I think my question probably will be, I think maybe answered in the additional data that's coming, because I too was looking at the numbers and I wasn't sure if total completed registrations and then total in the courses meant kids that had registered overall, or was that an indication of kids who wanted to take courses and there wasn't enough room? Because there were some mentions of request total and then total enrollment. And so I don't know if that's a separate question or that's one that's going to be answered, but I'm wondering if we have increased demand and we don't have enough capacity, and then it's just variable who gets into the class. And so if these are our targets, and it sounds like maybe these are not the right targets, there's just some randomness involved in reaching those as well.
I have to say, for some of our programs, they are so large, there is no more capacity, particularly when you're looking at the engineering strands at the middle school. There is only one lab with all the equipment, and there's 7 periods a day, and there probably could be offered more. And then in our lab classes, there's a lot of different courses going on in that class as well, and we run out of space.
yeah, that's what I've seen too. So when we get that other data, maybe it'll become clearer. But that maybe that could just be clarified. Like, what's the difference between number of students at that level, number of students who requested the class, and then the number of students who actually received a spot. So in other words, actually enrolled. But my general comment was, part of I've been asking for a long time to have CTE come and present, but not just particularly on this goal, but to just highlight the work that you're doing with your department across a wide range. So besides the computer science, we heard you mention some of the other areas, and normally the board just approves in our consent agenda the CTE report, but we wanted to have a chance to see if there were other ways that CTE could be supported in our district. We hear about fabulous programs, but the flip side of that is what else can we do to continue to support CTE? So there's a chance for you to maybe mention a few words on that. And then I think what everyone's minds, you put in a few things about how the CTE is able to support students during the COVID crisis. And yet it does seem that many of the courses are very hands-on. And so there might be, gaps right now. What's being done to address those, if at all possible. And then I want to say that at some point, I hope we still are able to do the tour that we were going to do as a board of the programs prior to the school buildings being closed. So very sad we weren't able to do that this year, but hope that that will come sometime in the future.
As far as Bellevue School District, I'm going to be honest, I don't think I've worked for a more positive and more supportive organization in my entire life. I've been at other places, but this is by far the best. It would be wonderful if we had more space, but we have certain constraints. But I mean, anytime I've asked for anything, I seem to have gotten it. So right at this particular moment, I can't think of anything but to actually celebrate the Bellevue School District and what they've done and what they have allowed me to do. I would love to offer some new programs at some of our schools. But then again, we have to see what the budget allows, and we need to see what students are interested in. I have had a lot of outreach from our community members. In fact, today Sound Transit contacted me again. They'd like to do a huge showcase when they open up to identify all the different careers and positions that are available in our community, not only in the area of engineering, but in computer science and accounting and all the other things that we offer. In construction, we are now very heavily connected with the Association of Construction General Contractors, and they wanted to do a huge presentation. In fact, they were signing the Core Plus construction, and we were one of the schools that received the pilot grant this year, and we're one of the schools that's going to offer the program, not this coming year, but the following school year. And so they want to do a huge celebration, but COVID-19 occurred. So I think that our name is out there, and I think they know that we do wonderful things. I know the teachers do. I know they work hard. And so I'm in a great place. And so I'm very proud of where I am, and I'm very proud of everyone I work with.
Well, thank you. That's great to hear. And I think the other part of it is just making sure that we continue to get the word out to students and families. For many students, having this exposure and understanding the impact that it can have on their lives in terms of them wanting to come to school and seeing a path forward, and having them engaged, and really fits in a lot with our mission and vision statements. And so that importance of CTE and making sure our community recognizes how important of a path it is for students, continue to do that as well. So thank you.
Yeah, and then I know you did mention something about what they're doing in the classroom when they can't have a lab setting. In our automotive program, they are doing all the automated service excellence certification. He's teaching the class, and then they're going through and doing the online and taking those exams. In our welding program, we got some online software or content that he's using, and he's doing demonstrations every week on how to use it, and then they go watch videos and do the content material there. In our biotechnology class, we were able to purchase a free, I think it's free, I don't know for sure. The kids are actually able to do labs virtually, so they're doing that. And in our nursing program, they're doing skills tests using they're either a doll or a teddy bear, and they're doing it virtually right now. So there's all kinds of things going on to continue the instruction.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Carolyn, did you have a question?
Yeah, okay. I do have a question. I have two questions actually. And they may be more appropriate to be asked, to be answered at the district level. But I noticed that in this, obviously with computer science, it's one of the few reports we get before the board that analyzes gender in a particular program. And I was just wondering whether we should be looking at this in other classes around the district. Now, we talked about, you know, the teaching academy or whatever, and should we make, you know, there's a big push on nationally to get more girls into computer science, but maybe we should be looking at more, you know, boys in teaching, or maybe there's a gender imbalance in, I don't know, calculus or some other class that I'm not thinking of. So I'm wondering if the district has considered looking at that, breaking down statistics that way and looking at that for other potential, I guess you might say, inequities in the kids that we're serving in different subjects that we think are important, because obviously we think computer science is really important. And then the other one is, I think you touched on this, the availability of the electives in secondary, because we have these wonderful lessons that I've seen on school visits in elementary, and then you get really, really excited, and then maybe you find that you can't get the elective. You said they are full, they're kind of over subscribed and everything. So what can we do at a district level to prevent drumming up all this enthusiasm and then letting people down?
I can speak for the CTE classes, for the state and for all of the reporting I do, end of the year report. I always have to discuss the inequity of gender. Okay. All of programs. I mean, that's just a state guideline and a rule. So this report isn't far-fetched from what I have to do normally, because we know we have gender gaps, and it's a state and a national issue. Some things we just can't change. Construction, sometimes has tend to be a male dominant. So what we need to do is to really look at ways that we can encourage females to look at the trade. But sometimes it's a parent decision, like, well, I really don't want you to go into the trades. I want you to do such and such. So sometimes it's just based on past history and perception, not necessarily based on facts. As far as other content area like calculus or whatever you've mentioned, that's somebody else's concern.
Yeah, but I was just thinking it might be something for us to look at. Yeah,
I think it's definitely one for us to look at. I don't believe we are doing that right now, so it's one that we can definitely take into consideration.
All right. Thank you, Carolyn. Great questions.
And the other one was about the you know, what can we do to make sure the kids who get excited about it can continue in it?
Well, we're doing everything we can, and the enrollment seems to keep blossoming. I know that at Bellevue we had skyrocketing in the culinary, because the instructor is a phenomenal instructor, but there's only one culinary lab. But you know, if we built another one and then the enrollment dropped, then we'd have an excess space that couldn't be used for multiple purposes. So you know, many times on some of these specialty programs where we have mass enrollment, sometimes we have to take the seniors first because that's our last opportunity, and then we work our way down. That's particularly like in our automotive program. There's a lot of students that want in there, so we start with, you know, our seniors and work our way down, knowing that the following year a student could probably be in that program. That's how we've tried to resolve that issue.
Okay. Well, it's good to see the enthusiasm, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I think I'm going to sum us up then. I'm not going to add questions because I think that Marilyn already addressed most of the ones that I sent in email before the report. So I just want to say thank you. There are a couple things I'd like to call out. We do have a pretty phenomenal CTE program here. And while there were some questions about making sure we get the word out and so forth, we can certainly always do better. But I will say that in my experience, as a parent in the district and on the board, that CTE is one of the programs that has been the most broadly and well communicated and most consistently communicated and exposed to me and others that I've heard about, that the quality of programs is excellent, that I've seen a real desire to make sure that we don't let programs get old and get out of date, that we keep them refreshed and relevant to our kids, and that we build things that are meaningful to kids. And I really appreciate Marilyn's leadership. And I also appreciate Sharon Kautz's leadership and really pressing to make sure that kids are leaving high school with practical skills and things that they can use, and that we're looking not just at high school, but at the beyond for them in the plan and in a real way that is not just focused on one path next, but on many paths next. And I really appreciate the leadership from both of them. I appreciate this report. And I'm just gonna motion that we accept the report as presented with the addition of the data that will come in later. So we won't have to have another vote or another presentation, but that data will just get slipped in, and then the report will be considered accepted at that point. Can I have a second on that?
A second.
Thank you. And any further discussion or questions before we move forward? Okay. Anyone who is in opposition to accepting this report? Anyone in opposition to accepting the report? Okay, then the report is accepted as presented with the additional data to be inserted when available. Thank you so much for this thorough look at things. Let's move to our final Tier 2 report for tonight, the instructional technology.
Yep, so we'll turn it over to Sharon Kautz and Eric Ferguson, who's one of our directors for teaching and learning.
Good evening. I was going to say good afternoon, but I think it's good evening now. I wanted to kind of just stay on this slide real quick, and I'm going to try to go as quick as possible so we can get to the questions and answers. Our instructional technology goal was really based on information that we get.
You've just been muted, Eric. Eric, you went into mute. Not sure how that happened, but we can't hear you.
Now can you hear me? Okay. So did you hear why I started with this slide? Okay, so when we look, let me just click back here. Our instructional technology goal was really based on the findings that we were looking for out of a program review that we did about our laptops. And so the summaries, and we have a document that has a summary of findings. And so some of the summary of findings found that overwhelmingly students and staff felt like the use of OneNote was a widespread adoption in probably 4 out of 5 classrooms. And part of the use of OneNote was also a degree of how teachers kind of organize their classrooms. The laptop program also has made significant progress towards our equity for all students to have access to high quality tools. Beyond the use of that digital notebook, the OneNote, to access online curriculum, our laptops are not really having any profound shift in instructions, and this was based on our November kind of report. But what I do have to say is now in COVID, we've actually had a lot of different significant changes that have happened. And one of the findings that we did find was that our laptops are a source of distraction in the brick and mortar classroom. So there were some recommendations, and part of those recommendations were to establish a purpose and a vision for the laptop program. And then a vision that we could also grab really quickly to help us come up with a Tier 2 goal was to work with a student wellbeing committee to consider the issues around appropriate and responsible use. And that's how we geared our Tier 2 goal. And so when we go to our slide that says we are on track And what we have is I definitely, when I submitted this, we were originally going to be using the Panorama survey, the spring survey, to get a baseline number. And that's why the word baseline is under a data source. But with COVID, what we decided to do was we were going to use a student survey that was delivered in early April. And then we were going to follow it up with a survey in May and then in June. And it was a survey that was going to measure engagement about students in a safe, positive, safe, legal, and ethical manner while using technology. So some of the modifications that we had to do because of COVID and our school closures is that we had to implement Teams, and we're using Teams now for the board meeting. And it was a tool that we had in place for all of our teachers, but we hadn't done a lot of training. And so we had to real quickly implement Teams. And then what we also needed to do was take a practice that we were using from face-to-face interactions with students, and it's a social emotional learning. There are 3 signature practices, and CASEL stands for the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. Well, CASEL has these 3 practices. One is having a inclusive welcoming, and then the second practice is having engaging strategies. And having a remote classroom and having some distance learning, it's critical that we have some engaging strategies. And that's where we were trying to have, and Carolyn, you saw that we have over 80 tools and 80 applications. We're trying to figure out what are those tools and applications that can have engagement and interact with students. And then that third signature practice is having an optimistic closure. And those are also in the appendix, and I can talk a little bit more about them. What we also wanted to do was every school has a positive behavior and intervention and support plan, PBIS, and we've tried to ask schools to take their plan and then how does it look in a digital world. And so then we also have some other guidelines that we supported families, but what I'd like to do is just keep going to get to the data. So we asked some questions, and I know the first question you're going to ask is, can you break out the data by its demographics? And unfortunately, this first time we gave the survey, we gave it on a platform that didn't allow us to break it up, but we were able to disaggregate the data by grade level. And so we asked the teachers, we asked the students, did your teachers review those expectations? And it was about 77% of the students said yes, they did. Then if we go to asking students, do you follow the school rules? District-wide, we hit 80.9% or 81%. What I also wanted to just quickly highlight on the right-hand side, this is one of those PBIS posters that a school would make, and this was Highland's poster, and what they did was they have an English version, and then they also had it printed in Spanish because of their dual language program. Going to this is a very interesting measure of, I know how often you follow the rules, but what about your classmates? And so when the students were asked about their classmates, that's when we dropped down to 56%. So really kind of getting to some of the findings, and this is what we kind of just looked at, was 81% of our students in 4th, 8th, and 10th grade reported that they follow the expectations or norms for most of the time or all of the time. That number dropped for our 4th graders down to 76%. And then when we asked about how about their classmates, that's when we dropped to 56%. Wanted to then just really quickly go to, so what is this doing? How is this helping us? And so what we've done is we're reaching out more to our elementary teachers to remind them to review those expectations on a more regular basis. That's where we utilize the ITCLs at the elementary level to talk to teachers about remembering for teachers to kind of talk about acceptable and responsible use. We also have posted some learning from home guidelines on our website. We've also, and I think Sharon might have shared earlier, we've provided an extensive professional development modules for all of our teachers so that they are able to engage in more of a remote learning or distance learning environment. We also are trying to model positive praise. And then part of that, the laptop review program, is we're going to establish a small committee to develop that clear vision for what does learning look like in both a remote setting as well as when we go back to school in more of a brick and mortar setting. What I definitely wanted to share, and I'm trying to get through so I can really let you ask questions, I just need to say a huge huge thank you to some of our curriculum developers, because when we were coming up with how we were going to measure instructional technology, what we did was we used Elizabeth Roberts, who is actually our library media specialist developer, to take the library standards. Keith Onstadt, who's our instructional technology, looked at the ISTE standards. And then Wendy Powell looked at our social emotional learning standards. And we did a crosswalk of those 3 standards to develop questions that would allow us to ask appropriate questions for our students. One of the other questions that I know was asked was about, we used a survey. The reason we used the survey and we didn't have a more, and actually I wrote it down, more of a, we did self-reporting instead of having students actually go do a task. Our original plan was to have more of a performance task that students would be able to engage in, but kind of due to the school closure, we had to go back to kind of plan B to just get students to self-report. So that's, I tried to go quick so we could actually get to questions.
Thanks, Eric. That's terrific. I'm going to actually clarify, because I'm the one who asked the question about which measure it was used. Totally understand that we had to change gears with the COVID closure. My question was actually more aligned to, why are we using the self-reporting that I myself understand when we know that kids say they understand things when they don't? Instead, why aren't we using or leaning more heavily on the report of my friends understand? Because that's a behavior that I experience. And when I say my friends don't understand, I'm experiencing a behavior that is out of what I think is out of whack with practices. And that seems to me like a better measure to use for this goal. That was the question that I was asking.
What's interesting is the self-reporting, and when you look at that question about how do your classmates follow, and then you look at both our 8th graders and our 10th graders, their feelings are a bit more, I guess, forgiving, but our 4th graders are pretty harsh on their classmates. Of they know how to follow the expectations. However, 50% of my friends don't. And so it is an interesting piece as kids get older. I don't know if it's the social cueing or if it's kids are behaving, but that was an interesting question, and we really wanted to keep it to have both self-perception and then what do you perceive of others.
Okay, thanks. So let's go ahead and see. Erica, do you have anything to bring up?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Great. Carolyn?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question so much as a worry that I'll express. It just seems, so we have these goals or achievements of 75% of kids understanding positive tech use, or something in the 70s, or maybe it gets up to 80. But it just seems like if there's 20% of kids that don't understand positive tech use, it leaves a lot of room for problems. And I guess since the whole COVID thing started, I heard from one parent who said that she was monitoring some emails that were going back and forth between the classmates. And it just seemed like the kids didn't really understand that it was going out to like everyone, and they were saying things that maybe you wouldn't if you were really thinking about who all is on there. And then I talked to a teacher who said she was concerned, didn't feel like she could do the Teams meeting because she had a kid that she knew would often blurt out hurtful stuff, let's say. Mm-hmm. So it's like, what are we gonna, I mean, it seems like we keep moving our number up, but that even that small percentage of kids that don't get it leave room for a lot of problem because of the online nature.
Good question, and appropriate question. And I think one of the benefits, and you have to remember that all of our kindergartners through 8th graders are only allowed to communicate with other people inside the BSD. And so in some ways, it's kind of like we're in a walled garden or in a protected area. And so students don't always do the right thing the first time. They don't even always do the right thing the second time. And so they need to have a place where they can practice. They need to have a place where it's safe. So, and then what it is it's a teachable moment. So when a student is in a chat and puts something that's not quite classroom appropriate, then what has to happen is the student gets redirected. And what we do is the teachers do have tools that they can kind of mute certain students, if they are blurting out too much, they could mute their microphone. So during this class time, I'm not going to let this student speak out. But then what I would do is I would actually try to talk with that student, maybe student and family, out of the class time and say, hey, you know what? Hey, Robbie, you know why I muted your microphone is because you were, so it's a teachable moment. And what I would like to encourage is that using Teams is a whole lot safer and a whole lot better than just setting it out to a Zoom meeting where just where you're not quite sure who else is in there. And the only way we can we do need to get into the weeds. And I do think if you think about a silver lining of COVID has really forced us that there was lots of questions around, should we really have the technology that we have? Should we really be putting technology into kids' hands? And I have to say, I think we are so fortunate that we have so many children. We have the kids that had technology. And even if they didn't think they were proficient, even if our teachers didn't really feel like they were proficient, boy, they've gotten a lot more proficient. And I think it's a new normal, and I think we're going to have to think about, okay, we go back to a brick and mortar building, but what are some of the aspects of the remote learning that we want to continue to do? We're starting to have schools build out teams, and they have a team site, and they have different channels. And what they're doing is they're finding that it's a great place to also have some social emotional connection with kids. And so when we're all in this kind of quarantined world, we're finding that we need still a place where it's super appropriate to have your camera turned on, trying to make eye contact with the other people, noticing both of you looking at me kind of with nodding of your head. And that's a huge important aspect. And so I think we're learning through this, and I think some of these things we're strengthened. And I think our goal should be that 100% of our kids know and understand appropriate safe behavior. And I do hope that our survey results that come back at the end of May, and then in June, the numbers I hope do continue to go up. But I also know that it also takes work.
Well, that was a good reminder that we are going up a learning curve here, you know, as a community.
Yeah. Could you imagine us doing a team meeting virtually a year ago?
I could imagine it, but
we're BSD. Of course we could have. We have amazing kids and teachers. Francine.
Yeah, so thanks. So I've been looking forward to this report for a long time, and then now some of the things have changed in it, right? So, you know, when you had laptops were distracted in the classroom, I think one of the things that I would have put on that slide also were laptops are a tremendous distraction at home. And we had heard a lot from families saying it's really hard to manage because it's not clear how much work a student necessarily has to do, how long do they need to have access to internet. And so on the one hand, that is perhaps even more true today. And yet we know that the laptops are being used a lot. So I would just say, along with this idea of how the students are using the technology appropriately, and you have several, you know, adjectives there, the other one would be also just in moderation. And I think that's included in some of the language that goes out around that, but really emphasizing that as well is the in moderation part, and how do laptops, whether it's a remote learning or in the future, whether it's some sort of blended learning, but going forward, we see that there is a role, and how is that used in moderation. So that's a comment. And then you had said in the slide that laptops, you saw that there wasn't necessarily a profound shift in instruction. They were just more digital notebooks prior to COVID, but now in COVID, it's changed. And I was wondering if you could give an example of what a shift in instruction looked like maybe pre-COVID, what it looks like now, and maybe just some comments and reflection on that. Like, what are the positive things to keep, maybe things that there's a shift in instruction, but maybe it's not positive. I don't know if that's going on, but just, I think that would be really helpful.
I think the piece that I learned most in our laptop review was the instructor that had really intentionality around why they were using the device then had more of a positive outcome than the person that just had the device open and had the kids use the laptops because we have them. And I think the tendency that we had when we first put devices in students' hands was that we needed to use them all of the time because we needed to justify having them. And I think what we need to do and the things that we're learning. And because of COVID, the instructional task is changing, and it's utilizing students to start in a team meeting with a prompt, and then the teacher may say, I want you to go into a separate kind of breakout room. You're going to then have a small conversation with the 4 of you. In 10 minutes, I want you to come back, and then you're going to be able to report. And so how are we using the tool to even in a remote setting, have collaboration happen? And I do think what would be wonderful is in a traditional classroom, you would say, okay, guys, when you break into that small group, everyone close the laptops, have eye-to-eye contact, collaborate, come up with your plan. Maybe one person could have the device open to take notes, but the idea wouldn't be that. I think what we really want to do is be more explicit about when do we use them and when don't we use them. And I think one of the outcomes that we found from the laptop review is that core classroom management about having clear expectations and rules and guidelines really kind of sets how students behave. And when we were looking at students last year, I was watching a student, Keith and I shadowed a few students at a few schools to watch how they behaved, how they were using the technology in their classrooms. And the interesting part was I watched one young lady in one classroom on task exactly where the teacher, using OneNote, flipping to the page where the teacher was using, taking notes. And then I was like, wow, I don't really know what I'm going to see when I go to next class with her, because this girl was spot on, 100% engaged with that teacher the whole time. That next classroom, it was amazing. I was like, is this a different kid? Because they weren't on task, they weren't engaged, and they actually were very distracted by the device. And so it takes me back to that teacher, and do the teachers have the tools to know how to have engaging strategies? And so thinking about some of the tools we've learned using Flipgrid and Nearpod this COVID time, it's going to help create hopefully some engaging strategies so that when we use the devices in our classrooms, the engagement level should be increased, hopefully.
Well, that sounds great. So I hope that those are definitely captured. And if we are looking at some sort of blended learning environment or what's going on, that it's going to be clear, like when using that technology makes the most sense, and when we want to give kids a break off of those devices and maximizing the time when they have hands-on experiences or need to have discussion face-to-face, since potentially they have a lot of screen time already. So that's good to hear. And then I just have a small comment that's come up, and I think it really goes with what you're presented around the responsible use. So it sounds like some of the kids are being told that the sessions are being recorded in teams, primarily to make sure that they behave well, and they don't actually have access to the recordings afterwards for the flexible learning component. So when I first had heard this report, I said, no, you're being recorded because that way kids who can't access the material at that time, or if you have additional questions, you can go back. And the families were saying, no, they don't have access to that. So maybe it's not clear where they need to click on the link, or I'm not sure if it's not being made available. Right. But the report, not only for the behavior management, but that then kids weren't participating as much. And I'm not sure if over time that's improving, that there just becomes well, I'm being recorded and I'm used to it now. But just a concern about how that may further limit student participation and the impact that may have. So
let's get an answer to that, because we're way over time, and we're gonna actually, our meeting will get truncated before we finish our business. So let's get an answer to that question. Okay,
so the final answer is the reason we would record a meeting is so that a student that wasn't able to attend it live during that meeting time would be able to go at another time. What if the teacher isn't making it accessible? It's a wondering to me. So I can actually do a little bit of investigating, but the normal practice would be, we're recording this session because I'm live with you folks, but I'm going to hit record so that if someone wasn't able to attend during our time at 9 o'clock from 9 to 10 on Wednesday morning, they would be able to watch it at another time. So that is the absolute intent, isn't to see what kids are behaving. It's absolutely to be able to have kids that aren't able to watch it during that live session.
Yeah, I think it's important that we communicate clearly about that. Not just it's awesome that you'll follow up, but if we could have clear expectations for the teachers, for the families, for the kids on what is going to be recorded, what if they can access it, when, how, where, why, and not be opaque about that. I know we're giving teachers a lot of flexibility in that area, but I think we also need to keep in mind that there are kid issues that have to be forefront in terms of learning and access. One of the things that teachers themselves are bringing up right now is ensuring that kids who are getting that incomplete space are taken care of. And I think if we don't have clarity on how kids can access things on a different schedule or offline, that's not going to serve them very well. Is that sort of some of the space you're going to, Francine?
Absolutely. Just a communication on that would be great. But it's what I've been trying to say, but having that come from the district directly would be great.
I can follow up on that.
Awesome. All right. And please, like, in final comment, thank you for the presentation, for the analysis, for the flexibility and adapting to how COVID changed things. I do think we need to pay attention to that number of how are the other kids preparing. And one of the comments I didn't get to make was about feedback loops. I do want to know eventually about how we can have more feedback loops in place to monitor how technology is being used and that it is being used in a safe and respectful way. We have a few great ones. Do you have any quick comments on that? Any things that help us make sure that kids aren't bullying, harassing, or causing undue duress to others or themselves?
I think the big benefit of using Teams and using our systems is that it's super easy and quick for us to investigate and sleuth out. When a student is kind of doing something on their personal phone, it's a whole lot harder from when I was in a building and trying to investigate what's on a personal device. So if students make a choice that isn't quite appropriate, I think having the tools and using Teams will allow us to investigate it and help the victim, and then help kind of work with the instigator to figure out why and what's causing it.
All right. Thank you for that. Thank you for this report. Again, I do think that the instructional piece is worth investigating. And I think that in some ways, when you made your comments earlier about instruction hasn't changed too much, that one of the things that struck me is that we should think about instruction more broadly, because instruction isn't just real time. There's instruction that takes place in the activities kids do with each other, with teachers in smaller groups, et cetera, et cetera. And also when we think about things like, well, shut your machine, we may actually find that something like that small group Teams event, in the past, when 4 kids are at a table group together, having your computer open might have been a terrible thing to do. It really defocused you from interacting. But if you have to maintain 6-foot separation in a classroom, that may actually enable us to have small group conversations in that classroom in ways we couldn't have before. So it's all relative and balanced. So thank you for the continued thinking.
I know you're running out of time. The one piece that I'm struggling with and we're struggling with is kids don't really like to turn their cameras on. And the feedback that I'm getting from kids, middle school and high school, is that it's creepy. And so it's something like we need to work with our kids about, but the adults still want to connect with you. And so it's about relationships, but the kids will tell me, oh, I don't want to turn my camera on because it's like super creepy. And so that is something that I've heard and we need to figure out and help kids with.
It's not just kids. Take a look at this meeting right here.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the view of your up close Sharpie, or not Sharpie, the Expo marker sculpture. Very interesting.
What that was? I thought maybe it was some kind of weird jacquard loom thing. Okay.
All right. So, board, I'm gonna motion that we accept this report as presented. Can I have a second?
I'll
second it.
Great. Thank you. Carolyn seconded it. Eric has thirded it. And now, is there any further discussion? Great. Is there anyone who has who would be opposed to accepting this report? Is there anyone who would be exposed to accepting this report? Great. This report is accepted. Thank you, team, and thank you to the entire district here for this really robust set of 4 reports, plus on top of it all, the COVID updates and keeping up with that. We really appreciate it. We are just going to jump right in now to a quick board action item that I'm hoping will take just a minute or two. I submitted the 4 proposals, position proposals to WASDA that we already voted on. In addition to that, there were 2 that I looked at that we hadn't submitted in the past, but someone else had. And then I asked WASDA if they had been submitted by anyone else to keep them in the forefront of advocacy, and they hadn't been. So I wanted to get your approval to resubmit these 2 proposals. I'm not rewriting them, I'm just resubmitting them so that they stay on the WASDA advocacy space. And they are, first, a one that just says that the state really needs to fund special education training for inclusionary practices, that it's something that we need funding for. That's really part of general ed, and it's part of the deal. And the second is about SEB, the employee benefits, that needs to be fully funded, and that we shouldn't be paying for employees who aren't using it. So those things are both on our own personal, our district's, our board's legislative agenda for this year. And so when I went through the WASDA positions and saw that those weren't being, hadn't yet been resubmitted, I thought we should be responsible and put them back up there. Discussion, thoughts, questions. I'm not going to make the motion until I give people a chance to sort of air it out if there's any questions.
Sounds good.
I think it's great that you went through and kind of caught that wasn't going to be a part of things.
Actually, I caught it when I tried to write a summary to ours, and I was saying, oh, and we didn't submit any positions on, and I went to our legislative agenda and I went through it and I was like, well, we didn't submit on special ed because they already exist, and we didn't submit on SEL because they already exist. And then I was like, oh, what about SEB? Oh, and wait, there's this special ed thing that is falling through the cracks. And so it wasn't a brilliant thing on my part. It was just trying to put a memo together, and then I realized, oops, I sort of dropped these on the floor. So now they're picked up from the floor. Erica, any comments, questions, input?
No, thank you for doing that.
Francine?
Thank you.
All right, great. I'm going to motion as written. So I motion the first proposed additional proposal here on special ed training as written. Can I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor? Oh, sorry, no. Anyone opposed? Anyone opposed? Okay, we passed the first motion. I motion that we approve the second motion as presented. Can I have a second?
Second.
Great. Anyone have any comments? Anyone opposed? Anyone opposed? All right, that's passed. Thank you for that. That takes us to the comments section, and before we do the comments, I just want to comment that I didn't plan for an executive session tonight. I left it on here if it was needed, if there was any board member who had something they wanted to bring up. If we needed to have an exec session, we'd need to do it immediately. We would only have about 12 minutes, and we'd have to skip the comments, verbal comments. So is there anyone who wanted or is hoping that we were having that exec meeting tonight?
I don't feel like I have a topic or need one, but I would think you could just do another meeting. I don't understand the logistics here.
You can, no? but then we have to keep this meeting open or have a plan for, and we didn't plan for the district, like this meeting has to stay alive.
Right.
Because then we have to come back to it so that the public can see that we didn't run away.
We could do that with some kind of slide with a link or something, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, something for future to think about, because this kind of like hard deadlines may not always be able to work.
Yes, Jen did say that she thinks she can come up with some things for us but they would be non-trivial. It would require the public having to click a second link, but we can, if there's something critical. We also will include a short special session as part of the special meeting that we're having next week. So that will be on the agenda as well. All right, so then that's done. Francine or Erica, did you have any need for that, or are you comfortable if we proceed with verbal comments?
Proceed.
Proceed. Okay, great. Ivan, anything you want to highlight from your updates?
Yeah, I would just, the first part of the update I put into the written part, but we received all the information from OSPI in terms of the resolution and waiver that we need to put in. So we are gathering that information together. We will get that to the board by the end of the week so that you can review, and then we can work to hopefully pass that at the meeting on the 28th. If you have any questions about the information that we submit to you, please direct them to me prior to that meeting so we can be ready to go for that.
Great, thank you. And any other stuff that you want to highlight today?
No, I think the rest is in the update. I would just say, in the lines of instructional technology, I did have the opportunity today to actually sit in on a 5th grade classroom social emotional learning check-in, and it was just a fabulous experience to see how the students, one, have different roles, two, to see how the educator was really doing a masterful job of ensuring that all students participated and checking in, and they were just moving through complimenting themselves on the remote learning experience. It was really wonderful to hear how many kids talked about, you know, being proud of the work that they're doing and being focused and staying online and staying engaged. And it was just a really great experience. And if anyone wants to have that type of experience, please let me know. I'd be happy to figure out a way to get you connected to a classroom just to be part of that check. And I really appreciated it.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say, as soon as you said that, I wonder if there's opportunity for board members to do that visit of a classroom, not one of their own kids, but to actually just go into one and just be a fly on the wall and observe. And we're not doing the school visits in person because they're not in person, but I think we could learn a lot if we each attended 1 or 2 classroom sessions.
Yeah, that'd be great. Remotely. Let me know if you want to do it and I'll arrange to do it. I was just planning on sitting and observing, and then the students actually asked me to check in, so I got to participate.
So we might need to throttle the number of board members that descend upon a particular class, but board members, if you guys are interested, just do you want them to contact you or Jen?
Contact me directly and then I'll work. But it was a really great experience. I just really got a lot out of it. It gave me a lot of insight into the work that we're doing and just the way that our educators have figured out ways to make this happen. And I just really enjoyed it. So yeah, please let me know.
Awesome. Okay, let's go ahead and Erica, do you want to do any verbal highlights from your report? And actually, I will ask the board if you could do a homework assignment this time. If you could go through the board comments, because some of us, like me, I didn't submit mine until after the meeting started today. So if everyone can read through the comments, that's great, but there may be highlights. Erica?
Just a compliment to the district is that the online enrollment seems to be up and working, and I found it very easy to use, in fact, easier than the original document, so that was great. One thing that I don't have in there that I'll bring up, I've been attending those East Side Pathways Zoom meetings whenever I can, and they've been doing breakout sessions related to specific region or areas of influence, like food or housing. And the one that I attended today was funding, specifically funding for all the organizations that are supporting our families across the community in a variety of ways. And one of the main issues that's come up is that the funding received for East King County is really only enough to support about 40% of the people in need. And there's a number of reasons why funding hasn't been directed towards East King County, include, perceptions of wealth and a lot of other things. But that is something to keep in mind as we're working with our students and families, that even though there's a million organizations working to do the work, we still might not be reaching everybody.
Good point. Good point. Thank you for that. All right. Carolyn, do you want to bring any highlights forward?
Yeah, I think I just mentioned that our Bellevue PTSA Council has elected their officers for next year, and they've worked out how to do more with online meetings. There's a Washington State PTA convention that has been going on for 2 solid weeks virtually. Every evening there's like a breakout session or something, and I've joined some of it, but definitely not all, that's for sure. And then one thing for district leadership maybe to think about, or more like building principles, if they could be, that the PTAs might need some help at the end of the summer or in the fall. It's going to vary by school, with things like yearbooks or other things that they have that they need help distributing to families, particularly like if a kid was a 5th grader and they were going to get their yearbook, but Lifetime just shut down because of COVID, so they won't get it. So it might need to be handed to them at middle school or something. So there might be some logistics there. And then also from previous discussion, I don't know, because I had typed something in the comment, and for OPMA, I probably should say it. Is that right, Christine? I was just worried about inequities based on, this is pertaining to the discussion of being able to phone people at home in their language. And just from my time at Stevenson, I observed that we were like, one person was doing translations in Spanish for free as a volunteer, and another person was doing them in Spanish and being paid an hourly rate. And so just for sort of like making sure we don't have inequities in our system where some people are doing the work as volunteers and some people are being paid if the volunteers don't know, you know what I mean? Like they don't know that other people are being paid. I mean, it's one thing when you go in and you volunteer to in the school to sharpen pencils or something, and you know other people work there on salary, but it's just, that's my concern. That you create an inequity if some people believe that everyone is volunteering.
Yeah, you're raising a great point. So I think in the past we've had some pretty nice guidelines about things that can be donated, and that includes services and time. And so if there may be a need to clarify in some district procedures or something, some clear expectations around how we work with partners as we increase our work with partners. That's a great clarification, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And I will say that there are traditionally a lot of folks doing things volunteer-wise that really should, in some cases, be paid for. And we don't always have the resources to come up with that. But I'm excited when somebody takes the opportunity and they actually put together, especially nonprofit organizations where people aren't going home with droves of dollars. They're getting by, but they're asking to just be paid enough so they can get by and provide the service. And especially when those organizations are being started by and run by people in our community who we don't often elevate to paid work and to recognize their work and the importance of it. So that's a great point, and I love the idea of having guidelines. So just great feedback to.
Well, let's just make sure it's equitable, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So Ivan, is that something you guys can take back as just some feedback about there may be some places to get some clarity in the procedures around that and some clarity in how we do community partnerships?
Yeah, I think we can. I definitely follow up with Carolyn offline too. I think it's the second time it's been brought up specifically about one of the groups, and so just want to make sure that it's clear that they're operating as a paid consultant also. So, but we can definitely look into it, and I'll follow up with Carolyn.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you so much. All right, great. Francine, anything you want to highlight from your thorough report here?
There are just the different categories that I collected over time. So there are still a lot of meetings going on, whether they're calls and Zoom. So I think most of it's there. I will just highlight, since I think it wasn't in anyone else's report, that we did hear from BSF, their fundraising. They're very thankful for the outpouring of support. They still have some ways to go on the fundraiser in terms of dollars to reach, and they are continuing through the end of May. So just want to highlight and thank BSF as a partner organization along with other partner organizations. And then just a note out there to all students that were sixth graders that were going to go to sixth grade camp. I know Tai was supposed to go to Camp Orkyla this week. They'd be there right now, as well as the many students who were going on other meaningful field trips. I know that eighth graders often go to Washington, D.C. and things like that. So just thinking of those students and those opportunities, and hoping that at some point we can find ways to have something, because those opportunities are ones I think that create memories for a lifetime and really provide important experiences and positive feelings about school. That's it. Oh, you're on mute.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. So then I will highlight just a couple of quick things from my report. One, I wanted to just point out that there is this state group that Carolyn alluded to that is filled with people. It's got over 160 people on it, and they're working on school reopening. And it's awesome what they're doing. It's just really disappointed the timeline they're doing it on. I mean, schools were one of the first things to close, and we don't even have a group that assembled to work on a reopening plan for schools until after the other phases were developed for reopening everything else. So it's an odd tension that we're walking here. I know we're dependent on that information. So we do have people who are representing us, where us is different ways. There are superintendents from the state who are representing. There are board members. There are community members. There are parent groups, what have you. And the nearest district to us, Issaquah, has Harlan Gallinger on it. And I wanted folks to know that we are giving input into that process, both through WASDA and directly to OSPI and to Chris Reichdahl, and making sure that they know some of the things we're worried about. I put them in my memo, so if anyone wants to know what are the things we've been communicating about. We didn't ask for graduation guidelines because we knew they were coming out, and the health department came out with some already. We're working on some other advocacy around broadband and some other things. Please know that it was brought to our attention by one of our community advocates that June 5th is National Gun Violence Awareness Day, and so you may consider wearing orange in support of that. I know that's part of our legislative priorities for the year is gun violence prevention, so I thought it would be worth calling that out. And we'll get updates from the committees next week. And I think that's everything that I have an update on. Does anyone have questions or anything that they want to add?
No, I put some of the committee updates in mine already, but tried to write everything there so that people could just read it when they have time.
Perfect. Carolyn, Erica, or Ivan, anything else to add tonight? All right.
Nope.
I just want to, oh, sorry, go ahead. Anything?
No.
Okay. I just want to end tonight with another bit of gratitude. I think that it is important that we don't forget that throughout our community, people are continuing to make great efforts to make this school year proceed. Not always ideally, but we are all making it work the best that we can. And I wanted to appreciate our families who continue to support their kids, our educators and other staff who are working from home under all sorts of circumstances to make things happen. The reporting that goes on, even though people are also trying to deal with all the COVID stuff, the staff pulls together and really is still focused on trying to figure out what results we're getting for kids. And I want to appreciate again, Jen, for all her thoughtful contributions in thinking about making sure we're responding to parents during this time and responding to people who are coming to our attention. And Eileen for doing similar things of keeping us all together. And the technology team for making all of these meetings happen, and our superintendent for keeping us together and communicating and growing and working and staying open. So thank you everybody for your work. Thank you Mike and Jason and Justin for all the technology management that you do for us. And thank you to everyone for the work you're doing. And I think with that, we're adjourned.
Thanks all.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, good night.